The train lurched to a stop with a scream of metal that echoed off the false front buildings lining the muddy thoroughfare of Broken Ridge, Wyoming. Eliza Hart pressed her forehead against the window glass, still warm from her breath, and watched steam billow past in gray clouds that matched the sky. November 1885. The end of the line. The end of everything, really. She'd counted her money 3 times in the last hour. $4.60. The hem of her dress was still damp from where she'd sewn the bills in with shaking hands back in Omaha, trying to hide them from the conductor who'd already looked at her twice with the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. End of the line, miss. The conductor's voice came from too close behind her. Unless you're planning to buy a ticket back east? Eliza stood, gripping the worn handle of her carpet bag. Everything she owned was in that bag, and it wasn't much. A change of clothes. Her mother's Bible, though she hadn't opened it in months. A daguerreotype of people who didn't matter anymore. No, she said quietly. I'm staying. His expression shifted. Not quite pity, not quite contempt. Something in between that felt worse than either. You got people here? I'll manage. She stepped down onto the platform before he could ask anything else. The cold hit her immediately, different from the cold back east. Thinner. Sharper. The kind that found every gap in your clothes and reminded you that winter here didn't ask permission. Broken Ridge wasn't much to look at. 24 buildings, maybe, clustered along a single street that turned to soup whenever it rained. The mountains rose up behind the town like a wall, their peaks already white with snow that wouldn't melt until May. The kind of place men came to disappear, and women didn't come at all unless they had no choice. Eliza had no choice. She walked the length of the main street twice, carpetbag growing heavier with each step. The general store. The saloon. The assay office. A building with a sign that read Doctor in hand-painted letters, though the windows were dark. Every door she approached seemed to close before she reached it. Not literally, no one was that obvious. But she could feel it, the way eyes tracked her, the way conversation stopped. A woman alone meant trouble. It meant questions. It meant something had gone wrong somewhere, and people in towns like this didn't like wrong things washing up on their doorstep. By the time the sun started sinking behind the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of orange and gold that would have been beautiful if Eliza had the luxury of caring about beauty, she'd learned 3 things. There was no work for a woman with no husband. There was no room at the boarding house for a woman with no money. And there was a man named Rowan Creed who lived up in the high country and might be looking for a wife. The last part came from a woman named Mrs. Yates who ran the general store. Her face creased like old leather, and her eyes sharp enough to gut a fish. You're that desperate, are you? Mrs. Yates said, not unkindly, but not kindly either, just stating facts. Eliza stood at the counter, her $4.60 spread out between them like an accusation. I need a place to stay. I can work. Can you cook? Yes. Clean? Yes. Mend? Yes. Mrs. Yates made a sound in the back of her throat. Every woman who gets off that train can cook and clean and mend. What makes you special? Eliza's hands curled into fists in her skirt. Nothing. I'm not special. I just need work. What happened to your people? The question hung in the air between them. Eliza could lie. She'd gotten good at lying over the past 6 months, but something in Mrs. Yates's expression suggested she'd know, and the lie would cost more than the truth. Cholera, Eliza said. The word came out flat. My father, my brother, then my mother, 2 weeks after we buried them. No other family? No. Man? Heat crawled up Eliza's neck. There was. He changed his mind when the money ran out. Mrs. Yates nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. You're not the first girl to show up here with that story. Won't be the last. She gathered up the money with thick fingers and dropped it into Eliza's palm. Keep it. You'll need it worse than I do. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's advice. Mrs. Yates leaned across the counter, her voice dropping. There's a man up in the high country, name's Rowan Creed. He comes down once a month for supplies. Doesn't talk much, doesn't look at people. But he works hard, pays in cash, and doesn't cause trouble. And he wants a wife? He asked me last spring if I knew any women looking for a situation. I told him I'd keep an ear out. Mrs. Yates straightened, crossing her arms. I'm not saying it's a good option. I'm saying it's an option. What's wrong with him? Nothing's wrong with him. He's just... Mrs. Yates paused, searching for words. Different. Keeps to himself. Lives way up high where the air's thin and the winters last 8 months. Some folks say he's not right in the head. Others say he's too smart for his own good. But he's never hurt nobody, and he pays his debts. Where is he? He'll be down tomorrow for supplies. Comes every first Thursday. Mrs. Yates studied Eliza with an expression that might have been sympathy. You can meet him if you want. Talk to him. See if you can stomach it. But, girl, and I mean this, if you go up that mountain with him, you better be sure, because once the snow starts falling, you won't be coming back down until spring. Eliza slept in the corner of the general store that night, wrapped in a blanket Mrs. Yates provided without comment. The floor was hard, and the cold seeped up through the boards, but it was better than the alternatives, better than the saloon, better than trying to find shelter in one of the abandoned shacks on the edge of town where the wind howled through gaps in the walls. She didn't sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face in the final hours, gray and hollow, whispering apologies for leaving Eliza alone. Saw Thomas, her almost husband, her salvation that never came, walking away down a Philadelphia street without looking back. She'd gotten on that train west because east held nothing but graves and broken promises, because someone had told her there was opportunity out here, that a willing worker could make a life. They hadn't mentioned that willing worker still meant you needed to be a man, or at least have one. Morning came cold and bright. Eliza washed her face with water from the pump behind the store, the cold making her fingers ache. She tried to fix her hair, but the small mirror in her bag showed her what everyone else would see. A woman who looked older than her 23 years, with shadows under her eyes and a dress that had been mended too many times. Mrs. Yates was already behind the counter when Eliza came inside, organizing tins of beans with the efficiency of someone who'd done the same task 1,000 times. He'll be here before noon, Mrs. Yates said without preamble. You should eat something. Looking half-starved won't help your case. Eliza accepted the bread and cheese Mrs. Yates offered, eating slowly to make it last. The store gradually filled with morning customers, men mostly, buying tobacco and nails and rope. They glanced at Eliza and away again, quick and dismissive. She recognized that look. She'd seen it on Thomas's face when he realized her father's business was gone. The money was gone. Everything was gone except a girl he'd made promises to when promises were easy. Noon came and went. Eliza sat on a barrel near the window, watching the street, watching the mountains, trying not to think about what would happen if this Rowan Creed decided he didn't want a wife after all, trying not to calculate how long $4.60 would last. It was almost 1 o'clock when she saw him. He came down the mountain path on foot, no horse, carrying a pack that looked half his weight. Even from a distance, she could tell he was tall, taller than most men she'd known. He moved with a strange kind of economy, each step deliberate, like he was conserving energy for a journey that wouldn't end when he reached town. He was dressed in clothes that had seen hard use but weren't ragged. Dark wool pants, a heavy coat that looked handmade, boots that had been resoled more than once. His hair was dark and longer than fashion dictated, pulled back from his face. When he pushed through the door of the general store, every conversation stopped. Rowan Creed didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He moved to the counter with that same deliberate efficiency, setting down his pack. Usual supplies, he said to Mrs. Yates. His voice was low, rough from disuse, but clear. Plus extra flour, salt, coffee. Planning for a hard winter, Mrs. Yates asked. Every winter's hard. Up close, Eliza could see his face properly. Sharp features, weathered by sun and wind. A scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, old and white. Eyes that were a strange pale green, like ice over deep water. He had maybe 10 years on her, maybe more. It was hard to tell with men who lived the kind of life that aged you in ways that had nothing to do with years. Mrs. Yates caught his attention with a deliberate clearing of her throat. Got something for you, Creed. That situation you asked about last spring. His gaze shifted to Eliza. She forced herself not to look away, even though everything in her wanted to. There was something unsettling about his eyes. Not cruel, not kind, just utterly unreadable. You looking for work? He asked. Yes? Can you cook? Yes. Handle altitude? Cold? I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone before she could be sure. Most people who say that are lying. I'm not most people. No, he said slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. I don't suppose you are. The other customers had given up pretending not to listen. Eliza could feel their attention like heat on her back. She lifted her chin. Mrs. Yates said you might need a wife. Might? He turned back to his supplies, starting to pack them away with practiced efficiency. What's your situation? I have none. No family, no money, no prospects. The words came out harder than she meant them to. If you're looking for someone refined, you should look elsewhere. But if you need someone who'll work and won't complain, I can do that. Why me? The question caught her off guard. What? Why marry a stranger? He didn't look at her while he talked, just kept packing supplies. Why not stay in town? Find work here? There is no work here. Not for someone like me. Someone like you. A woman alone. He nodded once, like she'd confirmed something. I live 14 miles up, above the tree line, cabin small, winter lasts September to May. Nearest neighbor is 10 miles down the mountain, and they're not friendly. I understand. No, you don't. Now he did look at her, and there was something almost like concern in his expression. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. The cold will hurt, the altitude will make you sick, the isolation will make you crazy. Most people can't handle it. I'm not most people, she said again. His mouth twitched. You said that already. It's still true. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her. Eliza had the strange feeling he was seeing past the surface, past the worn dress and tired eyes, into something deeper. It should have felt invasive, but it didn't. It felt like the first time in months someone was actually seeing her at all. We'd have to marry legal, he said finally. I won't have you trapped up there without rights. Won't have people saying I took advantage. All right. You'd have your own space in the cabin. I won't touch you unless you want me to. Heat crept up her neck again, but she kept her voice steady. All right. If you change your mind, if you want to leave come spring, I'll bring you back down. No questions, no debts. I won't change my mind. You might. I won't. He studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. Judge is 2 buildings down. We can do it now if you want. Leave at first light tomorrow. It was happening so fast. Too fast. But Eliza had learned over the past 6 months that hesitation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Opportunities came rarely and closed quickly. Now is fine, she said. The judge was a fat man named Horace Porter, who looked surprised to see them, but recovered quickly. He'd clearly performed shotgun weddings before, probably dozens of them. He read through the ceremony with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list, stumbling over the words in places. Eliza repeated her vows in a voice that didn't shake. Rowan repeated his in that same low, rough tone. There were no rings, no flowers, no witnesses except Mrs. Yates, who'd followed them down the street with an expression that suggested she thought they were both making a mistake, but wasn't going to say so out loud. You're married, Judge Porter said, signing the certificate with a flourish. God help you both. Outside, the sun was already sinking toward the mountains. Rowan looked at the sky with the assessing expression of someone who could read weather in ways Eliza didn't understand. We'll leave at dawn, he said. Meet me here. Bring only what you can carry. It's a hard climb. I don't have much. Good. He started to walk away, then paused. You eat today? Some. He pulled a cloth-wrapped package from his pack and handed it to her. Jerky. Eat it tonight. You'll need your strength tomorrow. Then he was gone, disappearing back up the mountain path with that same efficient stride. Eliza watched until he was out of sight, then looked down at the package in her hands. She'd just married a man she'd known for less than an hour. A man the town whispered about. A man who lived in a place so remote he had to warn her about the isolation like it was a physical threat. Mrs. Yates came up beside her. You sure about this, girl? Eliza thought about the train platform, the boarding house that had no room, the men in the saloon who'd looked at her like she was inventory, the empty spaces where her family used to be. No, she said honestly, but I'm out of other options. That's the truth most marriages are built on, Mrs. Yates said. Out here, anyway. She pressed something into Eliza's hand, a small knife in a leather sheath. Keep this, just in case. In case of what? In case you need it. Mrs. Yates's expression was unreadable. Creed's never hurt anyone that I know of, but he's still a man, and you're still alone with him. Better to have it and not need it than the other way around. That night, Eliza lay awake in the corner of the general store again, the knife under her makeshift pillow and the marriage certificate folded in her bag. She tried to picture the man she'd married, really picture him, beyond those pale green eyes and that scar and that voice like gravel. She couldn't. He was a stranger, a necessity, a way to survive the winter that was coming whether she was ready for it or not. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about the way he'd handed her that jerky, the way he'd insisted on legal marriage to protect her rights, the way he'd offered her an escape route even as she agreed to follow him into isolation. Maybe he was half wild like the town said. Maybe he was dangerous. Or maybe he was just a man who'd learned to live in a place that killed softer people. She'd find out soon enough. Dawn came gray and cold, the kind of cold that made Eliza's breath fog even inside the store. She dressed in her warmest clothes, which wasn't saying much, and packed her carpet bag with everything that mattered. The Bible, the daguerreotype, her one other dress, the knife Mrs. Yates had given her. Rowan was waiting outside when she emerged, looking exactly the same as yesterday, except now he carried 2 packs instead of 1. He handed her the smaller one without comment. 60 pounds, he said. Can you carry it? Eliza shouldered the pack. It was heavy, but not impossible. Yes. It'll get heavier as we climb. Tell me if you need to stop. I'll be fine. He gave her that look again, the one that seemed to see straight through her, but didn't argue. Stay behind me. Step where I step. If you start feeling dizzy or sick, tell me immediately. Don't try to be tough. I'm not trying to be anything. Good. Being yourself is hard enough up here. They left Broken Ridge as the sun broke over the eastern plains, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. The path started gentle, winding through scrub pine and sage. But within an hour, it began to climb in earnest. Eliza had never been good with heights. Growing up in Philadelphia, the tallest thing she'd ever climbed was the stairs to her family's townhouse. But she'd meant what she said. She wasn't going to complain. She focused on Rowan's back, on matching his pace, on breathing through the growing ache in her legs. The air changed as they climbed, thinner, sharper. Each breath felt like it gave her less oxygen than the one before. Rowan stopped every hour, pointing out places to rest, offering water from a canteen he carried. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was practical. See that deadfall? Cougar den. Give it space. Storm coming in from the west. We'll need to move faster after the next ridge. Don't eat snow. Makes you colder. Eliza filed it all away, trying to learn the language of this place that was so different from everything she'd known. They stopped for midday meal on a flat outcropping of rock with a view that would have stolen her breath if she'd had any breath left to steal. The whole valley spread out below them, Broken Ridge like a child's toy, the plains beyond stretching to a horizon she couldn't see. Rowan handed her more jerky and some hardtack that tasted like salted cardboard. She ate it anyway, too hungry to care. You're doing better than I expected, he said. Thanks, I think. Most people stop halfway up, start crying or panicking or both. I'm not most people. His mouth twitched again. You really aren't, are you? Why did you ask for a wife? The question came out before Eliza could stop it. You seem like someone who prefers being alone. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, alone's fine in summer, gets harder in winter, dark all the time, no one to talk to, starts to feel like the mountains are swallowing you. And you think a wife will fix that? No, but I think another person might make it less likely I forget how to be human. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Eliza studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes tracked movement on the slopes below with the vigilance of someone who couldn't afford to miss details. What's your real name? She asked. He glanced at her. Rowan Creed. No, I mean, who were you before you came here? His expression shuddered, going blank and unreadable again. No one. Same as now. I don't believe that. Believe what you want. Past doesn't matter up here. Only what you can do today. He stood, shouldering his pack again. We need to move. Storm's coming faster than I thought. Eliza could see it now, dark clouds building over the western peaks, moving toward them with a speed that seemed unnatural. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the protest of muscles that weren't used to this kind of work. The path got steeper, rockier. In places, it wasn't really a path at all, just a suggestion of direction across bare stone. Eliza's hands were scraped raw from catching herself on rocks. Her legs shook with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow. Rowan moved faster now, less careful about checking if she was keeping up. She understood why. The storm was close enough that she could hear it, a low roar like distant thunder. How much farther? She called. 2 miles. Maybe less. He didn't slow down. Can you run? If I have to. You have to. The first snowflakes hit like thrown pebbles, hard and sharp. Within minutes, the world turned white. Eliza couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. She kept her eyes locked on Rowan's dark shape, following him blindly through terrain she couldn't see. Her foot slipped on ice she hadn't seen. She went down hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. For a moment, she just lay there, stunned, the cold seeping through her clothes. Then Rowan was there, hauling her upright with a grip that was strong but not rough. You hurt? No. Can you walk? Yes. He didn't let go of her arm. Stay close, we're almost there. They pushed forward through the storm, Rowan's hand on her arm the only thing keeping her oriented. Eliza had lost all sense of direction, all sense of time. There was only the wind, the snow, the burning in her lungs, and the knowledge that stopping meant freezing. Then suddenly there was stone under her feet instead of snow, a darkness that meant shelter. Rowan pulled her through a narrow opening and the wind cut off like someone had closed a door. Eliza collapsed against the wall, gasping. Her whole body shook, cold, exhaustion, shock, all of it hitting at once. Stay put, Rowan said. She heard him moving in the darkness, heard the strike of a match. Light bloomed, warm and yellow. They were in a cave. No, not a cave. The walls were too smooth, too deliberate. Someone had worked this stone. Rowan lit a lantern, and the space came into focus. Maybe 20 feet deep, 10 feet wide. Supplies stacked along one wall in neat rows, firewood, a small stove, blankets in a wooden chest. Supply cache, Rowan explained, already building a fire in the stove. One of 3 between town and home. Storm shelter. Eliza tried to stand and her legs gave out. She sat down hard, not caring about dignity anymore. Rowan brought her a blanket, then another. Then he was pulling off her boots, checking her feet with the clinical efficiency of someone who knew what frostbite looked like. You'll be fine, he said. Cold, but fine. No damage. How long do we wait? Storm will blow through by morning. We'll leave at first light. He handed her jerky and water, then settled against the opposite wall with his own blanket. The stove gradually warmed the small space, pushing back the cold. Eliza ate slowly, feeling returning to her fingers and toes in painful increments. Outside, the storm howled like something alive and hungry. Thank you, she said quietly. Rowan looked at her over the firelight. For what? Not leaving me behind. You're my wife. I don't leave what's mine. It should have sounded possessive, controlling, but the way he said it, flat, matter-of-fact, it just sounded like a statement of responsibility, like he'd taken on a job and intended to see it through. Why do you live so far up? Eliza asked. Why not lower down, where it's easier? He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled, the wind screamed. Because down low people ask questions, he said finally. Up high, there's nothing but sky. And you prefer sky to people. Used to think I did. And now? He met her eyes across the fire. Now I'm not sure. They didn't talk much after that. Eliza wrapped herself in blankets and tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept thinking about the storm outside, the miles still to climb, the man across from her who was her husband-in-law, but a stranger in every way that mattered. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to Rowan shaking her shoulder gently. Dawn, he said. Storm's past. Outside, the world was transformed. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white that sparkled in the early light. The sky was impossible blue, and the air was so clear Eliza felt like she could see forever. "Beautiful," she breathed. "It'll kill you if you're not careful," Rowan said. But he was looking at the view too, and there was something in his expression that suggested he understood what she meant. They climbed the last miles in silence. The path was buried now, but Rowan navigated by landmarks only he could see. A particular rock formation, the angle of a ridge, the way the wind had carved the snow. Near midday they crested a final rise, and Rowan stopped. "There," he said. Eliza looked where he pointed and saw nothing. Just more mountain, more snow, more empty sky. Then Rowan started down a slope she wouldn't have thought anyone could descend, and she followed, and suddenly she understood. The valley was hidden, tucked between peaks in a way that made it invisible from below and above unless you knew exactly where to look. And in the center of that valley, so small it was almost invisible against the vastness, a cabin. No, not just a cabin. Even from a distance, even half buried in snow, Eliza could see that what Rowan had built was something more. The proportions were too deliberate, the placement too perfect, the way it seemed to grow from the rock rather than sit on it. They descended the final slope, and with each step, Eliza's certainty grew. The man she'd married had lied. Not about his name, not about the isolation or the cold or the difficulty, but about who he was. Because whoever built what she was looking at wasn't just a mountain man surviving alone. He was someone who knew how to create. The cabin sat in the valley like it had been born there, stone walls rising from bedrock in a way that seemed less like construction and more like excavation, as if Rowan had simply revealed what the mountain had been hiding all along. The roof was steep, designed to shed snow, but the pitch was exact, calculated. The windows were small but positioned to catch light at angles that suggested someone had tracked the sun's path through seasons. Eliza stopped walking without meaning to, her breath catching in a way that had nothing to do with the thin air. "You built this yourself?" she asked. Rowan was already moving toward the door, his pack making fresh tracks through snow that came up to his knees. "Mostly." "How long did it take?" 3 years, give or take. 3 years. Alone. At an altitude where most people couldn't think straight, couldn't breathe right, couldn't do more than survive from one day to the next. And he'd built something that looked like it belonged in a city, not buried in wilderness where no one would ever see it. The door wasn't locked. Out here, Eliza supposed, there was no point. Rowan pushed it open and gestured for her to enter first. The inside was dark until he lit a lamp, and then Eliza had expected rough. She'd expected functional. A place to sleep and eat and wait out the winter, nothing more. Instead, she stepped into a space that made her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. The main room was larger than it had looked from outside, the ceiling higher. Stone fireplace dominating one wall, the chimney disappearing up into darkness. But it was the details that caught her attention. The way the floorboards fit together without gaps, smooth as glass. The shelves built into the walls, precisely level. The table by the window, simple but perfect, the joint so tight she couldn't see where one piece of wood ended and another began. Nothing was rough, nothing was makeshift, everything was deliberate. "There's a room through there," Rowan said, pointing to a door on the far wall. "Yours. Bed's already made up, stove in there too. You can heat it separately if you want privacy." Eliza walked to the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was small but not cramped, a bed with a real mattress. Not just ropes and canvas. A chest for clothes. A window that framed the valley like a painting. "The walls are double-layered," Rowan continued, moving around the main room with the ease of long familiarity. "Stone on the outside, wood on the inside. Air gap between for insulation. Keeps the heat in, keeps the cold out. Mostly." He was lighting the fire now, building it with the same efficiency he did everything else. "Water's from a spring 50 yards north. Doesn't freeze because it comes up from deep. I'll show you tomorrow. Outhouse is built into the south wall, connected to the cabin by a covered passage so you don't have to go outside in storms." Eliza turned slowly, taking it all in. The shelves stocked with supplies, flour, beans, rice, coffee, sugar. Preserved meat hanging from the rafters. Tools arranged on the wall with the precision of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. Books, actual books, stacked on a shelf near the fireplace. Books. She crossed to them without thinking, her fingers brushing the spines. Philosophy, engineering, mathematics, poetry. A journal with a worn leather cover. "You read?" she asked. Rowan glanced over from the fire. "When there's light to read by." These aren't prospector books." "No. They're expensive." They were. He turned back to the fire, done explaining. Eliza pulled out the journal, opening it to a random page. The handwriting was neat, controlled. Sketches filled the margins. Architectural drawings, measurements, calculations. Plans for the cabin, she realized. Plans for other structures she didn't see anywhere. "You're an architect," she said. Rowan went very still. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling to life. He said finally. "People don't stop being what they are." "Yes, they do." He stood, brushing ash from his hands. "You should rest. Altitude sickness hits some people hard the first few days. If you feel dizzy or sick, tell me. Don't try to work through it." He was deflecting, closing down. Eliza recognized the tactic. She'd used it herself often enough when people in Omaha had asked questions she didn't want to answer. But she was too tired to push. The climb had taken everything she had, and now that they were stopped, now that she was warm and safe, exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. "All right," she said. She retreated to her room and closed the door. Sat on the bed, a real bed, the first she'd slept in since leaving Philadelphia, and tried to understand what she'd walked into. A man who lived alone at the edge of the world, who built like an artist and spoke like someone who'd forgotten how to use words for anything but function, who asked for a wife to keep him from forgetting how to be human, but who seemed determined to keep her at arm's length. She pulled off her boots with hands that shook from fatigue. Her feet were blistered, her shoulders ached from the pack, and her lungs still felt like they weren't getting enough air. But she was here. She'd made it. For better or worse, this was home now. She didn't remember lying down, didn't remember closing her eyes. But when she woke, the light coming through the window was different. Golden instead of white. Evening instead of afternoon. And something smelled good. Eliza pushed herself upright, head swimming briefly before settling. Through the door, she could hear movement, the clatter of a pot, the hiss of something cooking. She found Rowan at the stove stirring something in a cast-iron pot. He glanced at her when she emerged, but didn't comment on how long she'd slept. "Stew," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." Eliza sat at the table watching him work. His movements were economical, practiced. Someone who'd cooked for himself for a long time. When he ladled the stew into bowls and set one in front of her, she saw it was venison and vegetables. Carrots, potatoes, onions. Simple, but good. She ate slowly, her stomach unsure after 2 days of jerky and hardtack. Rowan ate across from her, his attention on his food rather than her. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 5 years, give or take. "And before that?" His jaw tightened. "Other places." "Rowan, you should know the rules," he said, cutting her off. "Winter rules. They're not negotiable." Eliza set down her spoon. "All right. Fire goes out, we die. So the fire never goes out. One of us checks it every few hours, day and night." "Understood." "Water supply is critical. We haul it every morning, no exceptions. Spring's reliable, but if something happens to it, we're in trouble." "How much trouble?" "The kind where we have to melt snow, which takes fuel we need for heat." He took another bite of stew. "Food's rationed. What you see here has to last until May. Maybe June, if the snow's bad. We can't go down for more." "What happens if we run out?" "We don't." It wasn't an answer, but Eliza didn't push. She was starting to understand that Rowan communicated in pieces, fragments of information offered when he decided they were necessary. "Storms can last days," he continued, "sometimes a week. When that happens, we stay inside. No exceptions. Going out in a whiteout means dying 30 feet from your door." "How do you know when it's safe?" "Experience. And if I say it's not safe, you don't argue. You don't know this place yet. I do." There was no arrogance in the statement, just fact. Eliza nodded. "Anything else?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I need to be alone. When that happens, I'll tell you. It's not personal. It's just how I manage." "All right. And if you need space, you tell me. I'll make myself scarce." It was the most mutual thing he'd said since they met, an acknowledgement that she might need distance too. They finished eating in silence. Eliza helped wash the dishes. There was a basin by the stove, water already warm from sitting near the fire. Rowan dried them with a cloth that had been mended several times but was clean. "I'll show you the spring tomorrow," he said, "and the rest of the layout. Where the wood's stored, how the root cellar works. Tools you might need." "Do you have work for me?" Eliza asked. "You said you needed someone who could work." "Cooking, mending, managing supplies, making sure we don't run through something too fast." He paused. "And company. That's work too, in its way." "Company," Eliza repeated the word slowly. "You mean conversation." "I mean not being alone with my thoughts for 6 months straight." There was something raw in his voice, quickly covered. Eliza studied his profile in the firelight, the scar that ran down his jaw, the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into sun and snow. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "Same thing that happened to you, life." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting tonight." He stood, gathering his coat. "I'm going to check the perimeter. Make sure the storm didn't damage anything. You should sleep more. Your body needs time to adjust to the altitude." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Eliza sat alone in his cabin that was now supposed to be her home. The fire crackled, wind whispered against the walls, and somewhere outside, her husband, a man she didn't know, didn't understand, was walking the edges of his isolated kingdom, checking for cracks. She thought about the books, the precise joints in the table, the way the cabin seemed to breathe, like it was alive. Whatever Rowan Creed had been before he came here, it was something more than what he pretended to be now. And Eliza was going to find out what. The next morning came with sunlight so bright it hurt to look at. Eliza woke to find Rowan already up, the smell of coffee filling the cabin. "Sleep all right?" he asked when she emerged. "Better than I have in months." "Altitude knocks some people out for days. You're doing better than most." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "We'll start easy today. Spring first. Then I'll show you how everything works." The spring was exactly where he'd said, a pool of crystal clear water bubbling up from between rocks. Steam rose from its surface, warmer than the air, cold enough to make Eliza's hands ache when she dipped them in. "Thermal," Rowan explained. "Heated from below. That's why it doesn't freeze. That's why I built here." "How did you find it?" "Looked." He was filling containers, working with that same steady efficiency. "Spent 2 months mapping the valley before I broke ground on the cabin. Had to understand the land first." Eliza helped carry water back, following tracks Rowan had already broken through the snow. The work was harder than it looked. The containers were heavy, the snow was deep, and her lungs still protested the thin air. But she didn't complain. Back at the cabin, Rowan showed her the root cellar, dug into the earth beneath the floor, accessed by a trapdoor near the stove. Cool and dark, stocked with potatoes, carrots, turnips, apples wrapped in cloth. The wood store was built into the north wall, protected from weather, organized by size and type. "This is split," Rowan said, pointing to one section. "Burns hot. This is unsplit. Burns longer. You use split for cooking, unsplit for overnight. How much do we have?" "Enough." He moved to another section. "This is kindling. This is pine, good for starting fires but burns too fast for heat. This is hardwood, maple, oak. That's what keeps us alive." Everything had a purpose. Everything had a place. Eliza was beginning to understand that chaos wasn't something Rowan tolerated, not in his supplies, not in his structures, probably not in his life. "You want control," she said without thinking. He glanced at her sharply. "What?" "Everything here is ordered, measured, nothing random." "Random gets you killed up here." "It's more than that." Eliza gestured at the cabin, the careful stacks of wood, the precisely labeled jars in the root cellar. "This isn't just survival. This is architecture." "Architecture is about control," Rowan said, "about imposing order on chaos. That's the whole point. And that's what you're doing here, imposing order." He held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his pale eyes. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I couldn't control anything else." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Then Rowan turned away, closing the trapdoor with more force than necessary. "There's other things you need to know," he said, back to business. "Emergency supplies are in the chest by the door. Flares, rope, extra blankets. If something happens to me, if I get hurt, if I don't come back, you have enough to survive until spring. Then you take the route we came up, follow it down. Don't try to take shortcuts. Stay on the path. Nothing's going to happen to you." "Probably not, but you should know anyway." They spent the rest of the morning going through procedures. How to bank the fire at night. How to tell when the food was running low. What signs meant a storm was coming. Rowan taught like he did everything else: spare words, clear demonstrations, no patience for questions that had already been answered. By midday, Eliza's head was spinning with information. She sat at the table while Rowan made lunch, more stew, this time with dried beans, and tried to process everything. "You said you had plans," she said, remembering the journal. "For other structures. What were you planning to build?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He was cutting bread, his knife moving with the precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. "Workshop," he said finally. "Storage. Maybe a greenhouse if I could figure out how to keep it warm enough." "Why?" "Because I could." It wasn't the whole truth. Eliza could hear that in his voice, but it was all he was willing to give. That night, after dinner, Eliza sat by the fire with one of the books from Rowan's shelf. Poetry. Whitman. She hadn't read poetry since her mother died, hadn't wanted to. But up here, with the wind howling outside and nothing to do but sit with her thoughts, the words felt different. Less like decoration and more like company. Rowan was at the table, writing in his journal. The scratch of pencil on paper was the only sound besides the fire and wind. "What are you writing?" Eliza asked. "Weather observations, temperature, wind direction, how much snow fell." He didn't look up. "Patterns, so I can predict better." "You could just look at the sky." "Sky lies sometimes." Eliza went back to her book, but her attention kept drifting to Rowan. The way he held the pencil, not like a laborer, but like someone trained. The neat lines of his handwriting, the occasional sketch in the margins. "Where did you learn to draw like that?" she asked. His hand paused. "School? What kind of school?" "The kind that doesn't matter anymore." "Rowan." "Drop it, Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her name, the first time his voice had held anything sharp. She closed her book. "I'm not trying to pry." "Yes, you are." "All right, yes, I am." She set the book aside. "Because I'm living with a stranger who won't tell me anything about himself, who builds like an artist but lives like a hermit, who asks for a wife but won't let her close enough to know him. You don't need to know me. You just need to survive the winter. That's not enough. It's going to have to be." He stood abruptly, closing the journal with a snap. "I'm checking the fire in the workshop. I'll be back in an hour." He left before she could respond, taking a lantern and disappearing into the darkness beyond the door. Eliza sat alone in silence, frustration and confusion warring in her chest. She'd expected hard work, cold, isolation. But she hadn't expected this, a man who seemed determined to keep her at a distance even though he'd been the one to bring her here. She thought about the knife Mrs. Yates had given her, still tucked in her bag, just in case. But she didn't think she'd need it. Not because Rowan was safe, she didn't know him well enough to know that, but because whatever danger he posed, it wasn't the physical kind. It was the kind that came from loneliness, from living so long in your own head that you forgot how to let anyone else in. Eliza had felt that kind of danger herself, in the months after her mother died. The way grief could become a room you lived in, walls closing tighter each day until you forgot there was anything outside. Maybe that's what this valley was to Rowan, a room he'd built around his grief. And maybe she was here to remind him there was a door. The days began to blur together, each one similar to the last. Wake before dawn, haul water, tend the fire, cook, clean, mend. The routine was numbing, but Eliza found comfort in it. There was something almost meditative about the work, the way it filled hours that might otherwise have been empty. Rowan kept his distance. Not physically, the cabin was too small for that, but emotionally. He spoke when necessary, answered direct questions with the minimum words required, and spent long hours in what he called the workshop, a separate building Eliza hadn't seen yet. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The snow deepened, the temperature dropped. and Eliza learned the truth of what Rowan had warned her about. The isolation was suffocating. There was no one to talk to except a man who didn't want to talk. Nothing to see except snow and sky. Nothing to hear except wind and her own thoughts circling like vultures. She found herself talking out loud sometimes just to hear a human voice, narrating her tasks, reading poetry aloud to the empty cabin. Once, she caught Rowan watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I didn't know you were there." "Don't apologize. I do it too." It was the most human thing he'd said in days. That night, a storm rolled in. Not like the one they'd weathered on the way up, but bigger, meaner. The wind hit the cabin like a living thing trying to get in, and the temperature plummeted so fast Eliza could see her breath even sitting close to the fire. Rowan moved through the cabin, checking everything. Windows, doors, the chimney draw. He added wood to the fire with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly how bad this could get. "How long will it last?" Eliza asked. 3 days. Maybe 4. "You can tell that from the wind?" "I can tell that from experience." He settled into the chair across from her, closer than he usually sat. "We'll need to keep the fire high. Temperature's going to drop below anything we've seen so far." "How cold?" "Cold enough that going outside for more than a minute means frostbite." The wind screamed, the cabin shuddered, and Eliza understood, in a way she hadn't before, exactly how fragile their survival was. They weren't protected by walls and fire. They were protected by Rowan's knowledge, his planning, his refusal to let chaos win. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "Anything. Tell me something about yourself. Something real." Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse again. Then, "I had a daughter." The words fell into the space between them like stones. Eliza's breath caught. "Had?" "Scarlet fever. She was 6. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "My wife got sick too. Lasted 3 days longer than our daughter, long enough to see her buried." "Rowan, Don't." He held up a hand. "I don't need sympathy. I need you to understand why I'm like this, why I came up here, why I don't let people close." Eliza sat very still, afraid that moving would make him stop talking. "I was an architect in Chicago," he continued. "Good one. Made decent money. Had a house in a nice neighborhood, a family, a future." He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "Then the fever came through. Took half the city. Took everything that mattered." "What happened after?" "I tried to keep working. Couldn't focus. Couldn't draw. Everything I designed looked like monuments to the dead." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I walked away. Spent 2 years drifting west. Ended up here because I couldn't go any further. Built the cabin because I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't destroying what was left of myself." The storm raged outside. Inside, the silence was deafening. "The valley," Eliza said slowly. "Is it a tomb?" "Yeah." Rowan's laugh was bitter. "That's what it was supposed to be, a place to die slowly where no one would have to watch." "But you didn't die." "No. Turns out surviving is harder than dying. Takes more work." Eliza thought about her own grief, her own reasons for being here. "I understand that." "Do you?" "My family's gone too. Different reasons, same result. I know what it's like to wake up and have to remember all over again that they're not coming back." Rowan looked at her then, really looked at her. His pale eyes caught the firelight, and for the first time since they'd met, Eliza saw past the walls he'd built. He was scared, not of the mountain or the cold or the isolation, of caring again. "I asked for a wife because I thought, I don't know what I thought," he said, "that having someone here would make it easier. That company would be enough. But it's harder than being alone. Because now I have to worry about keeping you alive too." "I can keep myself alive." "Can you?" "You can barely breathe up here. You don't know the mountain. You don't know when a storm's coming, or which snow is safe to walk on, or how to start a fire when your hands are too cold to work." His voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through. "You're dependent on me, and that means I'm responsible for you. And I don't want that responsibility, because the last time I was responsible for someone I loved, I buried them both." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and painful. "Then why did you ask me to come?" Eliza said quietly. Because I'm a fool who thought I could do this halfway. Have company without connection. Have help without obligation. He stood abruptly, pacing. I can't do halfway. It's not who I am. I'm all in or all out, and all in means I'll care, and I won't do that again. You don't get to choose, Eliza said. What? You don't get to choose whether you care. You already do. She stood too, facing him. You made sure I had warm clothes before we left town. You caught me when I fell in the storm. You built me a room with a window that faces the sunrise. You care, Rowan. You're just terrified of admitting it. His hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I do. Because I'm doing the same thing. She took a step closer. I didn't want to care about you either. You're strange and closed off, and half the time I don't understand you. But I'm here, and you're here, and whether we like it or not, we're in this together. Eliza, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to replace what you lost. I'm just asking you to stop pretending we're strangers passing time until spring. The storm hammered at the walls, the fire crackled, and Rowan stood there, something breaking behind his eyes. I don't know how to do this, he said finally, his voice rough. Neither do I. So we'll figure it out together. He looked at her for a long moment, and Eliza saw the exact instant he stopped fighting, saw his shoulders drop, the tension drain from his jaw. All right, he said quietly, together. It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even a promise, but it was a beginning. And in the middle of the storm, at the top of the world, surrounded by nothing but snow and sky and each other, a beginning was enough. The storm lasted 5 days, not 4. 5 days of wind that sounded like voices screaming, snow that erased the world beyond the windows, cold that made the stone walls weep with frost on the inside. 5 days trapped in a space that felt smaller with each passing hour, the cabin walls pressing closer while the darkness outside pressed back. But something had shifted between them that first night. Some wall had cracked, and neither of them seemed willing to rebuild it. Rowan talked more, not easily. The words still came slow, pulled from some deep place he'd kept locked. But they came. He told her about Chicago, about the buildings he'd designed before everything fell apart. A library with windows that caught light at angles most architects wouldn't think to calculate. A concert hall where the acoustics were so precise you could hear a pin drop from the back row. I was good at it, he said on the third day of the storm, both of them sitting close to the fire because the temperature had dropped so low that even 10 feet away the air bit exposed skin. Not just competent, good. I could see a space in my head before I drew a single line, could feel how people would move through it, where they'd pause. What would catch their eye? You still have that, Eliza said. I can see it in the cabin, in how everything's placed. It's not the same. This is just function. No, it's not. Function doesn't care about the window in my room facing east. Function doesn't arrange books by height and color. Function doesn't build a door handle at exactly the right height, so you don't have to reach or bend. Rowan looked at her, something uncertain in his expression. You notice that? I notice everything up here. There's not much else to do. He almost smiled. Almost. Fair point. They played cards with the deck, so worn the suits were barely visible. Rowan teaching her a game he said he'd learned from a prospector in Montana. They read aloud to each other, trading off chapters from a novel about the sea that neither of them particularly liked, but finished anyway because giving up felt like admitting the storm had beaten them. And they cooked together, Eliza learning that Rowan had strong opinions about the proper way to make cornbread and that he sang under his breath sometimes when he thought she wasn't listening. Off-key. Old songs she didn't recognize. Where'd you learn that one? She asked on the 4th day, catching him mid-verse about a girl and a river. He stopped immediately, color rising in his face. My mother, before she died. It's nice. You should sing more. I'm terrible. Yes, but it's still nice. This time he did smile, quick and gone, but real. On the 5th day, the wind finally died. The silence woke Eliza before dawn, so sudden and complete it felt wrong. She lay in bed listening to nothing, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't name. Then she heard Rowan moving in the main room, the scrape of the door, the crunch of boots on snow. She found him standing outside when she emerged, wrapped in his heavy coat, staring at the valley. The sky was clear, stars still visible in the west, and the snow had transformed everything into something that didn't look real. Too perfect, too clean. Beautiful, Eliza breathed, coming to stand beside him. Beautiful and deadly. Rowan pointed to a section of the southern slope. See that? Avalanche waiting to happen. Snow's too heavy, built up too fast. Give it a day of sun, and the whole thing will come down. Will it reach us? No, wrong angle. But it shows how fragile this all is. One wrong step and the mountain takes you. They stood together in the pre-dawn darkness, and Eliza understood what he meant. Not just about avalanches. About all of it. The valley was beautiful because it was brutal. Safe because it was isolated. Home because everywhere else had broken them. Show me the workshop, she said. Rowan glanced at her. Why? Because you spend half your time there and won't tell me what you're doing, and we just agreed to stop pretending we're strangers. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right, but don't expect much. The workshop was 50 yards from the cabin, connected by a path Rowan had cut through snow that came up to Eliza's waist. The building itself was smaller than the cabin, but built with the same precision, stone and timber fitted together like puzzle pieces. Inside, Rowan lit lanterns and Eliza stopped breathing. The space was full of half-finished things. A table that was 3/4 complete, the legs carved with a pattern that looked like water flowing. A set of chairs in various stages of construction. Drawings pinned to the walls, architectural sketches, elaborate and detailed, showing structures that didn't exist anywhere but in Rowan's imagination. But it was the model that caught her attention. It sat on a workbench in the center of the room, large enough that it must have taken months to build. A miniature valley, their valley, rendered in wood and stone and wire. And filling that valley were buildings, dozens of them, houses, a hall with soaring windows, a bridge that arched over a ravine Eliza recognized from their climb up, gardens laid out in geometric patterns, walls and pathways and structures that turned the empty valley into something impossible, a city, hidden in the mountains where no one would ever find it. This is what you've been building, Eliza said, her voice barely a whisper. Planning, not building. Rowan moved to stand beside the model, his hands hovering over it but not touching. Just planning. For what? I don't know. He sounded frustrated, angry at himself. At first it was just something to do. Keep my hands busy. Keep my mind occupied. But it kept growing. Every winter I'd add more detail, more structures. Like if I could just plan it perfectly enough, I could bring them back. He flinched. No, I'm not that delusional. I know they're gone, but maybe I could build something they would have been proud of, something that mattered. Eliza walked slowly around the model, taking in the incredible detail. Windows that would catch morning light, courtyards designed to shelter from wind, a tower at the highest point with sightlines to the entire valley. This isn't grief, Rowan. This is genius. It's pointless. No one's ever going to see it. I'm one man with limited supplies and half a life left if I'm lucky. Building even a quarter of this would take decades. So? So it's a fantasy, a waste of time. Is it? Eliza turned to face him. You said you came up here to die slowly, but this isn't dying. This is the opposite. This is creating something that could outlast you by centuries. There's no one to build it for. Build it for yourself. Build it because you can. Because you're the only person alive who could look at this valley and see what it could become. Rowan stared at the model, his jaw working. I tried that. Tried to care about the work itself. It wasn't enough. Making beautiful things for no one felt worse than making nothing at all. Then make it for both of us. He looked at her sharply. What? You're not alone anymore. Whether you wanted to be or not, I'm here. And She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound foolish. I want to see this. I want to help build it. Not the whole thing, maybe, but something, one structure, one proof that your plan works. Eliza, you don't understand what you're offering. This would take years. I have years. I have nothing but years and nowhere else to be. You could leave in the spring, go somewhere easier, find a real life, not this half-existence. This is a real life. She moved closer, her voice firm. Maybe not the one I imagined, but it's real. I'm real. You're real. And this She gestured at the model. This could be real too if you'd stop being so afraid of wanting something. The words hit harder than she meant them to. Rowan's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for her to track before settling on something that looked like pain. I'm not afraid of wanting, he said quietly. I'm afraid of losing. Again. Then don't lose. Build something that can't be taken away. Something that'll stand here long after we're both gone. They stood there in the lamplight, the model city between them, years of loneliness and loss pressing down on both of them like the weight of the snow outside. Where would we start? Rowan asked finally. Eliza's heart jumped. You're asking me? You're the one who wants to build it. I don't know anything about architecture. You know what you like, what feels right. He pointed to the model. Pick something, anything. Tell me what speaks to you. Eliza studied the miniature valley, overwhelmed by options. Then her eye caught on a small structure near the spring, a circular building with a domed roof and windows all around. That one. What is it? Greenhouse. Or it was supposed to be. A place to grow things year-round, herbs, vegetables, maybe flowers if I could figure out how to keep it warm enough. Start there. That's one of the hardest designs. The heating alone, you said pick something that spoke to me, that speaks to me. A place to grow things in the middle of winter, a place where spring never ends. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, then at the model, then back at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite hope, but close. The shadow of possibility. It would take all spring and summer to build, maybe longer. Then we'd better start planning now. He almost laughed. Almost. But his hands were already moving to the drawings on the wall, pulling down the one labeled greenhouse in his neat handwriting, spreading it across the workbench beside the model. And Eliza understood that this was what turning points looked like. Not grand declarations or dramatic moments, just a man deciding to try again, a woman deciding to stay, both of them choosing something harder than giving up. The winter settled into a new rhythm after that. The storm still came, brutal and relentless, but between them were days of crystalline clarity when the sun turned the snow into fields of diamonds, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. On those days, Rowan taught Eliza to read his drawings, showed her how the lines translated to real structures, how you calculated load and stress, and the 100 other factors that meant the difference between something that stood and something that collapsed. She had a good eye, he said grudgingly. Could spot when proportions were off even if she couldn't explain why. They worked through the greenhouse design together, Rowan refining calculations while Eliza asked questions that sometimes annoyed him and sometimes made him stop and reconsider assumptions he'd taken for granted. Why glass? She asked one afternoon, both of them hunched over the drawings while snow fell outside in thick, lazy flakes. For light. Plants need light to grow. But glass is expensive, heavy, hard to get up here. What about something else? Like what? I don't know. You're the architect. Rowan frowned at the drawing. Mica, maybe. It's lighter, more flexible, doesn't shatter as easily. Can you get it? There's deposits in the mountains. I'd have to mine it, process it, more work, but he grabbed a pencil, sketching quick modifications. Actually, that could work. Might work better than glass. Mica diffuses light instead of focusing it, less risk of burning seedlings. Eliza watched him work, the way his whole body changed when he was designing. The tension that usually lived in his shoulders disappeared. His hands moved with confidence. He looked younger, alive in a way he didn't the rest of the time. You miss it, she said. Chicago, the work. His pencil paused. I miss who I was when I had someone to build for. You have someone now. He glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not quite attraction. It was too soon for that, too complicated. But recognition. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time and finding something unexpected. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess I do. The moment stretched between them, delicate and new. Then Rowan cleared his throat and went back to his sketches, and Eliza pretended her heart wasn't beating faster than the altitude warranted. January turned to February. The days grew incrementally longer, though the cold showed no signs of breaking. Eliza's body finally adjusted to the altitude, her lungs learning to pull oxygen from air that felt more like memory than substance. She was stronger now, could haul water without stopping to rest, could split kindling without her arms shaking, could walk through snow that would have buried her 2 months ago. And she was less afraid of the silence, of the isolation, of the man she'd married in desperation and was starting to know in truth. Rowan was difficult, moody. He had days when he barely spoke, when some darkness pulled him inward, and all Eliza could do was give him space and hope he'd find his way back. But he always did, and slowly, in pieces, he let her see past the walls he'd built. He told her about his daughter, Mary, how she'd loved birds, could identify them by their songs, how his wife Ellen had been the practical one, the one who kept him grounded when his designs got too ambitious, how they'd been happy in the simple way that happiness exists when you don't know it can end. In return, Eliza told him about Philadelphia, about her father's shipping business that collapsed when his partner ran off with the money, about Thomas, who'd promised marriage right up until the moment her family had nothing left to offer, about the slow erosion of watching her mother lose the will to live, grief and poverty eating away at her until there was nothing left. I was angry at her, Eliza admitted one night, both of them sitting by the fire while wind rattled the windows. For giving up, for leaving me alone. That's normal. Is it? Because I still feel guilty about it. Normal doesn't mean easy. Rowan was quiet for a moment. I was angry at Ellen too, at the end. She wouldn't fight, just let the fever take her. Part of me understood she didn't want to live without Mary, but part of me hated her for it, for choosing to die when I was right there, still alive, still needing her. Did you ever stop being angry? No, but I stopped letting it run everything I did, mostly. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind howled like something looking for a way in. Rowan, Eliza said carefully, this valley, this plan to build, is it enough? What do you mean? Is hiding up here, creating something beautiful that no one will ever see, is that really what you want? Or is it just less painful than the alternative? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was rough. I don't know. I came up here because everything else hurt too much to stand. Built the cabin because I needed something to do. Started planning the rest because the alternative was putting a bullet in my head. He looked at her. Is it enough? Maybe not. But it's what I have. You have more now. Do I? You have me, for whatever that's worth. Rowan held her gaze, and Eliza saw the war happening behind his eyes. Want and fear, fighting for dominance. It's worth more than you know, he said finally. That's what scares me. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Eliza wanted to move closer, wanted to offer comfort, but some instinct told her to wait, to let him come to her when he was ready. So she just nodded and said, then we build the greenhouse, and after that we build something else, and we keep building until it stops scaring you. That might take a while. Good thing we have time. March came with a week of storms that buried the valley under 15 feet of fresh snow. Then came a week of sun so bright it was blinding, the snow starting to melt in earnest for the first time since they'd arrived. Rowan began preparing for construction. He took inventory of materials, made lists of what they'd need, started mapping out the timeline. His energy was different now, focused, purposeful, like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. One morning, Eliza woke to find him gone, a note on the table in his precise handwriting, scouting the construction site, back by evening. She spent the day doing routine tasks, but her mind kept wandering to the greenhouse design, to the idea of spring in the middle of winter, of green things growing in a place that should be barren. When Rowan returned, his face was windburned, but his eyes were bright. It'll work, he said, pulling off his coat. The location's perfect. Good drainage. Protected from the worst winds. Close enough to the spring to run pipes if we're clever about it. When do we start? Soon as the ground thaws enough to dig. May, probably. June, if we're unlucky. He sat at the table, pulling out his journal and sketching quick notes. We'll need to harvest mica first, process it, cut timber. There's limestone deposits we can use for mortar. It'll take weeks just to gather materials before we break ground. I can help with that. Most of it's dangerous, steep slopes, loose rock. Then teach me how to do it safely. He looked up at her, pencil poised over paper. You're serious about this? Yes. Why? You could coast through spring doing nothing, then leave with a clear conscience. I wouldn't blame you. This isn't your dream. Maybe it is now, Eliza said. Maybe I want to build something too, something that proves I was here, that I mattered. Rowan studied her for a long moment, and Eliza had the strange feeling he was seeing straight through her skin to whatever lived underneath, seeing the same hunger she saw in him, the desperate need to create something that would outlast the pain. All right, he said quietly. We build it together. April brought the first real thaw. Water ran everywhere, down slopes, through channels Rowan had cut years ago, pooling in places before finding new paths. The valley transformed from white to brown to the first hints of green as plants that had been dormant for months pushed toward light. And Rowan changed too. The darkness that usually clouded him lifted, replaced by a restless energy that had him up before dawn and working until well after sunset. He was planning, calculating, preparing for construction like a general preparing for war. Eliza helped where she could, learned to identify good timber from bad, learned which rocks would split clean and which would shatter, learned the valley in a way she hadn't during the winter, when survival had been the only goal. She learned it was beautiful. Harsh, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with truth. The mountains didn't lie, didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were. Ancient, indifferent, powerful beyond human measure. And somewhere in those weeks of preparation, something shifted between her and Rowan. Nothing dramatic, no moment where everything changed, just a gradual ease, a slow lowering of defenses. He touched her more, casually, without thinking. A hand on her shoulder when he passed, his fingers brushing hers when they worked side by side. Nothing romantic, but not entirely practical either. And she found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking, noticing the way sunlight caught the gray starting to thread through his dark hair. The strength in his hands that came from years of hard work. The rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face when something pleased him. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the soil love could grow in if they let it. One evening in late April, after a long day of sorting lumber, they sat outside watching the sun set behind the western peaks. The air was finally warm enough to be comfortable, the first real warmth they'd felt in months. I need to tell you something, Rowan said. Eliza's stomach tightened. What? If we do this, if we really build the greenhouse, it means committing to another winter up here, maybe more than one. You can't build something like this and then abandon it halfway through. I know that. Do you? Because spring's coming. In a few weeks you could leave, go down to Broken Ridge, catch a train east, find a real life somewhere that isn't trying to kill you 9 months out of 12. I could, Eliza agreed. Is that what you want? No. The word came out quick, almost involuntary. Rowan looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest ache. But I need you to choose this knowing what you're choosing, not out of obligation or lack of options. Choose it because you want to stay. I want to stay. Why? It was a fair question. Eliza thought about the answer, picking through her reasons like sorting stones. Because I'm tired of running, she said finally. Because for the first time since my mother died, I'm building something instead of just surviving. Because this place is hard and lonely and beautiful, and so are you. And I think... She paused, gathering courage. I think we could build something here that matters, not just the greenhouse, something bigger. Like what? I don't know yet, but I want to find out. Rowan was quiet, his pale eyes reflecting the last light of day. Then he reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and solid and real. All right, he said. Then we stay, both of us, and we build. The sun disappeared behind the mountains and the valley filled with shadows, but neither of them moved. They sat there in the gathering dark, hands linked, watching their breath fog in the cooling air. And Eliza thought about beginnings, about how they rarely looked like you expected, how they could start with desperation and isolation and two broken people who didn't know how to be whole anymore. But maybe that was all right. Maybe broken things could build broken things, and maybe in the building, both could start to heal. The stars came out one by one, impossibly bright in the thin mountain air. And somewhere in the valley below, something rustled in the brush. A deer, maybe, or an elk returning from winter range. Life, coming back, just like them. May arrived with mud. The snow melted faster than the ground could absorb it, turning the valley into a maze of streams and bogs that sucked at boots and made every step treacherous. Rowan cursed the timing, too wet to dig, too early to plant, stuck in the messy middle ground between winter and summer. But he didn't stop working. If anything, he pushed harder, using the delay to stockpile materials they'd need once the ground dried. He showed Eliza how to identify mica deposits in the rock faces, how to extract thin sheets without shattering them. The work was tedious, dangerous, required more patience than Eliza knew she had. "Slower," Rowan said, watching her try to pry a sheet free. "You're forcing it. Let the rock tell you where it wants to split." "Rocks don't talk." "They do if you're listening." Eliza wanted to argue, but she bit back the retort and tried again. This time she paid attention to the tiny variations in the stone's surface, the hairline fractures that suggested natural breaking points. The mica came free in one piece, translucent and perfect. "See?" Rowan's voice held something that might have been pride. "You're learning." They worked through May like that, gathering materials in careful increments. Mica for the greenhouse panels, limestone for mortar, timber cut from trees Rowan had marked years ago, left to season in the dry mountain air. Every piece had to be hauled to the construction site, back-breaking work that left Eliza's shoulders aching and her hands blistered. But she didn't complain, partly because she'd promised she wouldn't, but mostly because she was starting to understand what Rowan had meant about the work being meditative. There was something almost peaceful about the repetition. Chip away at rock. Carry materials, stack them in neat piles. Repeat until your body moved without conscious thought, and your mind was free to wander. She found herself thinking about her mother during those long days of physical labor. Not the hollow ghost she'd been at the end, but the woman she'd been before. Sharp-minded, practical. Someone who'd run a household with the efficiency of a general running a campaign. She would have understood this, Eliza thought. Would have approved of building something with your own hands, instead of waiting for life to happen to you. One afternoon, while they were sorting timber near the construction site, Eliza asked the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. "Why a greenhouse? Out of everything in your model, why did you design that first?" Rowan didn't look up from the board he was inspecting. Seemed practical. Food security, fresh vegetables year-round. That's not the real reason. He was quiet for long enough that Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Mary loved gardens. Ellen kept one behind our house in Chicago. Roses, mostly. Some vegetables. Mary would spend hours out there, digging in the dirt, talking to the plants like they could hear her. His hands stilled on the timber. After they died, I couldn't look at growing things without feeling sick. Everything alive felt like an accusation, like the world had no right to keep blooming when they were gone. And now? Now I think maybe that's exactly why things keep growing, because death doesn't stop life. It just makes room for what comes next." Eliza watched him run his hand along the wood grain, checking for flaws she couldn't see. "The greenhouse isn't about food at all, is it?" "No, it's about proving I can still create life instead of just marking its absence." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. She wanted to say something profound, something that would ease the grief that still lived in him like a second skeleton. But there were no words for that, so she just moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching, and kept sorting timber in silence. By mid-June, the ground had finally dried enough to break. Rowan spent a week staking out the greenhouse foundation with a precision that bordered on obsessive, checking and rechecking his measurements until Eliza wanted to shake him. "It's a foot off in either direction really going to matter?" she asked, exasperated. "Yes." "How?" "Because if the foundation isn't level, nothing built on top of it will be level. And if the structure isn't level, it won't shed water properly, won't distribute weight evenly, won't survive the first heavy snow. So we'd fix it. Or we do it right the first time and don't have to fix anything." Eliza threw up her hands. "Fine. Check it again. Check it 50 more times if it makes you happy." "It's not about happiness. It's about structural integrity, which you've already verified, twice. Third time's a charm." But he was almost smiling when he said it, and Eliza realized this was just how he worked. Measure 3 times, cut once. Never trust assumptions. Always verify. She wondered if he'd been like this before Chicago, or if loss had made him this way, unable to take anything for granted, always preparing for the next disaster. Digging the foundation was brutal work. The ground was rocky, studded with stones that had to be pried out one by one. Rowan wanted it 3 feet deep, below the frost line, which meant moving what felt like half the mountain one shovelful at a time. They worked from dawn until the light failed, stopping only when their bodies demanded it. Eliza's hands, already rough from months of mountain living, developed new calluses. Her back ached constantly. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream. But the foundation took shape. A perfect circle, exactly as Rowan had drawn it, dug into the earth like they were planting the building instead of constructing it. "Why circular?" Eliza asked one evening, both of them sitting on the edge of the completed excavation, too tired to walk back to the cabin just yet. "Strongest shape? No corners means no weak points, even weight distribution, better heat retention." Rowan picked up a handful of dirt, letting it sift through his fingers. "Also, I like the symbolism. No beginning, no end, just continuation. That's almost poetic. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation as a practical man. Your secret's safe with me." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank behind the peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The air was finally warm, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers that had started blooming in scattered patches across the slopes. "Eliza," Rowan said, his voice careful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, coming up here?" She turned to look at him, surprised by the question. His expression was unreadable, but there was tension in his shoulders that suggested the answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. "No," she said honestly. "Sometimes I'm scared. Sometimes I'm lonely, even with you right here. Sometimes I miss things I didn't think I'd miss. Crowds, noise, the ability to walk down a street without planning for survival. But regret? No. This is hard, but it's honest. And after months of living with lies, telling them, hearing them, being buried under them, honest is worth more than easy. Even when honest means digging holes in frozen ground until your hands bleed. Especially then. At least I'm building something. At least I matter here." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You matter everywhere. You just couldn't see it before." "Neither could you." "No," he agreed, "but I'm starting to." The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Rowan stood, offering her his hand, and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, we should eat before we're too tired to cook." They walked back to the cabin together, and Eliza noticed that he didn't let go of her hand right away, held it a few steps longer than necessary before releasing it to open the door. Small things. But small things could be earthquakes if you let them. The foundation walls went up over the next 2 weeks, stone and mortar, built with a precision that Eliza was starting to expect from Rowan. He'd calculated the exact ratio of limestone to sand to water that would create mortar strong enough to survive winter freezing and thawing cycles. Tested it, adjusted it, tested again until he was satisfied. Eliza mixed mortar and hauled stones, learning to read Rowan's grunts and gestures well enough that they could work for hours without speaking. There was something almost intimate about it. The way they moved around each other, anticipating needs, filling gaps in each other's work without discussion. "You're getting good at this," Rowan said one afternoon, inspecting a section of wall Eliza had laid while he was cutting stones. "Good enough that you'd hire me in Chicago. Good enough that I wouldn't fire you after the first day." High praise. The highest I give. But he was smiling when he said it, and Eliza felt something warm bloom in her chest. July brought heat, or what passed for heat at this altitude. Temperatures climbed into the 70s during the day, warm enough to work in shirt sleeves. The valley exploded with life. Wildflowers carpeting meadows in riots of color, animals emerging from winter dens, birds returning from wherever they'd fled when the snow came. And Eliza bloomed too. The work had changed her body, adding muscle to her shoulders and arms, darkening her skin from constant sun exposure. She was stronger than she'd ever been, could haul stones that would have been impossible 6 months ago. But it was more than physical. She felt different inside, more solid, more certain, like she'd been a sketch before and was slowly becoming a finished drawing. Rowan noticed. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not desire exactly, though there was heat in it. Something closer to recognition, like he was seeing her truly for the first time and finding something unexpected. One evening, after they'd finished a particularly difficult section of wall, Rowan broke his usual pattern and suggested they eat outside instead of in the cabin. Why? Eliza asked, surprised. Because we've been inside or working for weeks. Because the weather's perfect. Because I want to. It was the most impulsive thing she'd heard him say. She agreed immediately, before he could change his mind. They ate bread and cheese and dried meat while the sun set, sitting on a flat rock outcropping that overlooked the greenhouse site. From here, Eliza could see what they'd built. The circular foundation, walls rising slowly, already taking shape. It's really happening, she said, half to herself. Did you think it wouldn't? I don't know what I thought. That you'd lose interest, maybe, or that it would turn out to be impossible. I'm not used to things actually working out. Neither am I. Rowan was quiet for a moment. But this feels different, like maybe we're building something that wants to exist. Buildings don't want anything. You'd be surprised. Some structures fight you every step. Nothing fits right. Everything takes twice as long. Materials fail for no reason. Others practically build themselves, like they were waiting for someone to give them form. And this one wants to exist. I can feel it. They finished eating as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The air cooled quickly at this altitude, but it was still warm enough to be comfortable. Eliza found herself acutely aware of Rowan sitting next to her, the solid presence of him, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his breathing had slowed to match the rhythm of the evening. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Seems to be the theme tonight. Do you ever think about going back? To Chicago? To civilization?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "No." "Not even for supplies? Better tools? To see if any of your old colleagues—" "They're not my colleagues anymore. That life's gone. I made sure of it." "How?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I burned it. All of it. My drawings. My client list. Every design I'd ever created. Stood in my office after Ellen's funeral and burned it all in the fireplace until there was nothing left but ash." Eliza's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I couldn't stand to see them. Couldn't stand to know I'd made beautiful things while my family was dying. Couldn't separate the work from the grief." His hands clenched into fists. "And I thought if I destroyed it all, if I made it impossible to go back, maybe I could become someone new, someone the grief couldn't find." "Did it work?" "No, grief found me anyway. Turns out you can't burn your way out of loss. You just end up empty and covered in ash." "But you're not empty now." "No," he agreed quietly. "Not anymore." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his pale eyes made Eliza's heart stutter. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Want, yes, but also fear. The look of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing they needed to jump but terrified of the fall. "Eliza," he said, her name rough in his throat, "I need to tell you something." "All right. This, you being here, us building together, it's changing things, changing me. And I don't know if that's good or terrifying or both. What kind of things? I'm starting to care again. Not about the work, about you." He looked away, jaw working. "And every time I let myself feel that, I remember what caring costs. Remember what it's like to lose someone you—" He stopped, taking a sharp breath. "I don't know if I can survive that again." Eliza's chest felt too tight. "So what are you saying? That you want me to leave?" "No, I'm saying I'm scared of how much I want you to stay." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Eliza knew she should say something, should offer reassurance or understanding or whatever you were supposed to offer someone admitting they were falling for you. But her own fear was just as loud. Because she was falling too, had been falling since that night in the storm when Rowan had told her about his daughter, had let her see past the walls. And falling meant risking everything, risking the fragile peace she'd built, risking her heart on a man who'd already admitted he might not be able to catch it. "I'm scared too," she said finally. "I didn't come up here looking for love. I came looking for survival, and now I don't know which one I'm getting. Maybe they're the same thing. Or maybe one destroys the other." Rowan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, rough and warm and certain. "I can't promise you easy," he said. Can't promise I won't be difficult or moody or lost in my own head for days. Can't promise this valley won't try to kill us, or that we won't go crazy from isolation, or that any of this will work out the way we hope. That's a terrible sales pitch. I know. But I can promise I'll try to let you in, to build something with you that's not just stone and timber, to not run when things get hard. That's all anyone can promise. Is it enough? Eliza thought about the question, really thought about it. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way it balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Ask me again when the greenhouse is finished, she said. Rowan's hand dropped from her face. For a moment, disappointment flickered across his expression, then understanding, then something that looked almost like relief. Fair enough, he said. When the greenhouse is finished. They sat together until the stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon, close enough to touch, but not touching, both of them holding their breath against the future. August arrived with the framework. Rowan had designed a support structure that was almost sculptural, curved ribs of timber that would hold the mica panels, rising from the foundation walls to meet at a central point in the domed roof. The math required to calculate the angles was beyond Eliza, but she held the measuring tape and marked cuts while Rowan worked through problems on sheets of paper he'd brought from his workshop. This piece needs to bend, he said, pointing to one of the ribs. But if we cut it, it'll snap. So we steam it instead. Heat and moisture make the wood flexible. They spent 2 days rigging a steam box, testing temperatures, learning how long different woods needed to become pliable. It was maddening work. Too little heat and nothing changed, too much, and the wood split anyway. But when it finally worked, when Rowan pulled out a piece of timber that curved exactly as needed, Eliza felt like they'd performed magic. How did you know that would work? She asked. Shipbuilders do it. Read about it in a book years ago. Never tried it myself, but the principles seemed sound. You learned it from a book. Best teachers I ever had were books. They don't judge, don't get impatient, don't care if you have to read the same page 50 times before it makes sense. They installed the ribs one by one, each piece fitting into precisely carved notches in the foundation walls. The structure took shape slowly, the skeleton of the building emerging like something being excavated rather than built. Eliza loved this phase, loved seeing the thing Rowan had imagined becoming real, three-dimensional, something you could walk through instead of just look at on paper. And she loved watching him work, the way his whole body engaged with the task, muscles moving under sun-darkened skin. The focus in his expression when he was checking angles, making minute adjustments no one else would notice. The rare, satisfied grunt when something fit perfectly. He was beautiful when he was creating, not in the conventional sense. His features were too harsh for that, marked by weather and grief. But beautiful in the way a hawk was beautiful, or a thunderstorm. Powerful and precise and completely himself. She wondered if he knew, if anyone had ever told him. One afternoon, while they were installing the final rib, the timber slipped. Eliza grabbed for it instinctively, but the weight was wrong, the angle bad, and suddenly she was falling. Rowan caught her. One arm around her waist, the other braced against the wall, taking her weight and the timbers without apparent effort. For a moment they just stood there, frozen, her back pressed against his chest, his breath warm on her neck. You all right? His voice was rough, strained. Yes, sorry, I should have. Don't apologize. These things happen. But he didn't let go immediately. Neither did she. They stood there in the half-built greenhouse, both of them breathing too fast, the timber forgotten on the ground beside them. Eliza could feel his heart pounding against her back, could feel the tension in his arm where it wrapped around her waist, like he was fighting the urge to pull her closer or push her away. Rowan, she said softly, I know. We should. I know. But still, neither of them moved. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, until finally Rowan released her with obvious reluctance. We should finish this, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Storm coming tomorrow. We need the frame up before it hits. Eliza bent to retrieve the timber, using the movement to hide her flushed face. How can you tell? Sky's clear. Barometer's dropping. Winds shifted. Trust me. She did. That was the problem. She trusted him completely, had learned to read the subtle shifts in his mood the way he read weather patterns. And right now, he was fighting something just as hard as she was. They finished the framework as the sun set, both of them working with single-minded intensity, not talking, barely looking at each other. By the time the last piece was in place, full dark had fallen and the first stars were appearing. Rowan stood back, surveying their work. The greenhouse skeleton rose against the night sky, ribs curving up to meet in a perfect point, the shape unmistakable now. "It's beautiful," Eliza said. "It will be, once the panels are in." "No, it's beautiful now." He glanced at her, something flickering in his expression. "You see things different than I do." "How?" "I see what's missing. You see what's there. Maybe we need both." "Maybe." They walked back to the cabin in silence, the air cooling rapidly now that the sun was gone. Inside, Rowan built up the fire while Eliza started dinner, the routine so familiar now it required no discussion. But the tension from earlier hadn't dissipated. It filled the cabin like smoke, making every casual touch feel charged, every glance weighted with meaning. They ate quickly, barely tasting the food, cleaned up in silence. And when there was nothing left to do, when the fire was banked and the cabin was ready for night, they stood there in the lamplight, neither quite willing to retreat to their separate rooms. "The storm," Rowan said finally. "It'll be bad. We should check supplies. Make sure we have everything we need." "We checked yesterday." "Check again." It was busy work and they both knew it, but Eliza helped anyway, counting beans and flour and coffee they'd counted a dozen times already, anything to avoid acknowledging what was happening between them. Finally, when there was truly nothing left to do, Rowan cleared his throat. "You should sleep. Big day tomorrow if the weather holds." "You too." "I will. I need to finish some calculations first." He was lying. They both knew it. But Eliza nodded and retreated to her room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She lay awake for a long time, listening to Rowan move around in the main room, the scratch of his pencil, the occasional creak of his chair, wondering what he was really doing, wondering if he could feel her through the wall the way she could feel him, wondering what would happen when they ran out of excuses to avoid each other. The storm Rowan had predicted arrived the next morning with a vengeance. Not snow, it was too warm for that, but rain that fell in sheets, turning the valley into a muddy swamp within hours. They were trapped inside, confined to the cabin while water pounded the roof and lightning cracked across the sky close enough to make the air smell like metal. Eliza tried to read but couldn't focus, tried to mend clothes but kept losing count of stitches, finally gave up and just sat by the fire, watching rain streak the windows. Rowan was equally restless. He paced, checked the barometer, paced some more, started a dozen tasks and abandoned them all. Finally settled at the table with his journal, but Eliza noticed he was just staring at blank pages, not writing anything. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," she said. He stopped pacing. "Sorry, just storms make me tense." "Because of the crossing? When we first came up?" "Before that. The night they died." He sat heavily in the chair across from her. "There was a storm, thunder and lightning. Mary was terrified, kept crying for me to make it stop." "Rowan, you don't have to." "She had a fever. We didn't know it was scarlet fever yet, just thought she was sick. Ellen was trying to cool her down with wet cloths while I sat there holding Mary's hand, telling her the thunder was just clouds bumping together." His voice cracked. "She believed me. Stopped crying, closed her eyes, and she never opened them again." Eliza moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. They were shaking. "Every time I hear thunder, I'm back in that room," he continued, his pale eyes too bright. Holding her little hand, feeling it go cold, knowing I couldn't protect her from the one thing that mattered. "It wasn't your fault. I know that. Rationally, I know that. But knowing and feeling are different things." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in harsh white light. Thunder followed immediately, close enough to rattle the windows. Rowan flinched. Eliza squeezed his hands tighter. "Look at me," she said firmly. "You're not there. You're here, with me, and we're both alive. For now." "Yes, for now. That's all anyone gets." He looked at her, and the grief in his expression was so raw it hurt to see. "How do you do it? How do you keep going when you know everything you care about can be ripped away?" "I don't know. I just do. Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm too stubborn for that. I gave up for years. That's what the valley was. A slow surrender. But you're not surrendering anymore. You're building. We're building. Another crack of thunder. Rowan's whole body tensed, but he didn't look away from her. I can't lose you too, he said, the words barely audible. I know that's not fair. I know I don't have the right to feel that when this isn't even... Eliza didn't let him finish. She leaned forward and kissed him. For a moment, Rowan went absolutely still, shocked into paralysis. Then his hands were in her hair, pulling her closer, kissing her back with a desperation that stole her breath. It wasn't gentle. It was raw and messy and tasted like grief and need, and every moment they'd been avoiding this. His mouth was hard against hers, demanding, like he was trying to prove they were both alive through the simple act of contact. Eliza matched his intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him down from the chair to kneel on the floor with her. The storm raged outside, but neither of them heard it anymore. There was only this, hands and mouths and the frantic need to be closer. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Rowan pressed his forehead to hers. We can't, he said, but his arms tightened around her even as he said it. Why not? Because I'm broken, because I'll hurt you eventually, because I don't know how to do this without destroying everything. Then we'll figure it out together, like everything else. Eliza? She kissed him again, softer this time, slower, a promise instead of a demand. I'm not afraid of your broken pieces, she whispered against his mouth. I have plenty of my own. Rowan pulled back just enough to see her face, his hands framing her jaw with surprising gentleness. This changes everything. I know. If we do this, I won't be able to let you go. Then don't. He searched her expression for doubt, for hesitation, found none, and something in him finally surrendered. He kissed her again, and this time there was no holding back, no careful distance, no pretending they were strangers who just happened to share space. They made love on the floor in front of the fire, rain hammering the roof and thunder shaking the walls, two broken people finding wholeness in each other's damage. It was awkward in places. They didn't know each other's bodies yet, fumbled with buttons and clasps, bumped noses and apologized breathlessly. But it was real, raw and honest, and theirs. After, they lay tangled together on a blanket Rowan had pulled from somewhere, the fire warming their skin, the storm finally starting to ease. The greenhouse isn't finished, Eliza said, her head on Rowan's chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. No, but I'm answering your question anyway. His arms tightened around her. And? It's enough. You're enough. This is enough. She felt his chest hitch, like he was trying not to cry. Then his lips pressed against her hair, gentle and reverent. I love you, he whispered. I didn't think I could anymore. Thought that part of me died with them. But I love you. Eliza's throat tightened. I love you too. They stayed there until the fire burned low and sleep started pulling at them. Then Rowan carried her to his room, the first time she'd been inside it, and they slept tangled together, the storm outside fading to memory. September arrived with the mica panels. Installing them was delicate work. Each piece had to be cut precisely, fitted into the framework, sealed against weather. Rowan had designed a system of clips and channels that would hold the panels while allowing for expansion and contraction with temperature changes. It was brilliant. It was also tedious beyond belief. They worked together now, with an ease that came from knowing each other completely. Rowan no longer hid in silence when darkness pulled at him. Eliza no longer pretended she didn't notice. They'd learned each other's rhythms, when to talk, when to be quiet, when to touch, and when to give space. The greenhouse took shape panel by panel, the structure transforming from skeleton to something almost alive. Light filtered through the mica in diffused patterns, turning the interior into a space that seemed to glow from within. It's like being inside a pearl, Eliza said, standing in the center while Rowan worked overhead. That was the goal. Soft light, no harsh shadows, gentle environment for growing. You succeeded. He climbed down from the ladder, wiping sweat from his forehead. They were both filthy, covered in rock dust and grime, and Eliza had never been happier. One more panel, Rowan said, studying the remaining gap in the roof. Then we seal everything. Then we test the heating system. And then? Then we plant something and see if this actually works. They installed the final panel as the sun set, both of them working by lantern light to finish. When the last clip snapped into place, Rowan stepped back and just looked. The greenhouse was complete. A perfect dome of stone and timber and mica, glowing in the dusk like a lantern. Exactly as he'd drawn it, exactly as he'd imagined. "We did it," Eliza said, moving to stand beside him. "Yeah." His voice was rough. "We did." She expected him to be triumphant. Expected celebration. Instead, he just stood there with tears running down his face, silent and unashamed. "Rowan? I didn't think I could," he said. "Didn't think I could finish something I started. Didn't think I deserved to create something beautiful after I failed to protect what mattered most." Eliza took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You didn't fail. You survived. And you're still creating, still building, still here. Because of you. No, because of both of us." They stood together in front of the greenhouse as night fell completely, stars emerging one by one in the clear mountain sky. And Eliza thought about journeys, about how they rarely ended where you expected, how hers had started with desperation on a train platform and led here, to a hidden valley, a brilliant man, and a building that proved grief didn't have to be an ending. It could be a beginning, too, if you were brave enough to let it. The first seeds went into the ground on a morning so clear the air felt like glass. Eliza knelt in the rich soil they'd hauled up from the lower valley and mixed with compost, her hands working the earth while Rowan adjusted the heating pipes he'd run from the thermal spring. The system was simple but elegant. Water circulated through copper tubes buried beneath the planting beds, keeping the soil temperature stable even when snow piled 6 feet high outside. "Tomatoes here," Rowan said, marking rows with stakes. "They need the most heat. Herbs along the outer ring where it's cooler, root vegetables in the center beds. You've been planning this for a while. 5 years, give or take." He knelt beside her, opening a packet of seeds saved from summers past. "Never thought I'd actually plant them." "Why not?" "Because planting means hoping, and hope felt dangerous." Eliza understood that. She'd spent months after her mother's death refusing to plan beyond the next day, because planning meant believing in a future that could be ripped away. But her hands were in the soil now, pressing tiny seeds into darkness, covering them gently and trusting they'd find light. They worked through the morning, planting row after row, basil and oregano, carrots and radishes, lettuce that would grow year-round if the heating system worked. Rowan had brought seedlings too, tomato plants he'd started in the cabin weeks ago, their leaves already dark green and healthy. "Will they really grow through winter?" Eliza asked, settling a tomato plant into its hole. "If I did the math right, if the heating holds, if a dozen other things don't go wrong." He tamped soil around the roots with careful pressure. "But yeah, I think they will." By afternoon, the greenhouse was planted. Neat rows of potential, waiting to prove whether Rowan's design was brilliant or just another beautiful failure. They stood at the entrance, looking at what they'd created, not just the structure, but the promise of life it held. "Now what?" Eliza asked. "Now we wait, keep the soil moist, monitor temperature, watch for problems." Rowan glanced at her. "And we start planning the next project." "Already? You think one greenhouse is enough?" There was something lighter in his voice now, almost playful. "I've got a whole valley to fill." Eliza looked out at the expanse of land surrounding them, trying to see it the way Rowan did. Not empty, but waiting, full of possibility. "Show me," she said. They spent the evening in the workshop, Rowan pulling out drawings he'd made over the years. A hall with windows that would catch sunrise and sunset. A bridge spanning the narrow gorge at the valley's southern end. Terraced gardens that would turn the steep slopes into productive farmland. A tower, not for defense but for observation. A place to watch storms roll in and stars wheel overhead. "This one," Eliza said, pointing to a sketch of a small building near the cabin. "What's this?" Rowan's expression shifted, becoming almost shy. "Workshop, bigger than what I have now, with proper tools, space to work on furniture, maybe. Things we could use, or..." He stopped. "Or what? Or trade? If we ever wanted to. If we built enough of whatever this becomes that we needed things from down below." "You're thinking about the future." "Trying to. It's hard. Every time I let myself plan beyond next week, part of me expects everything to collapse." Eliza reached for his hand, squeezing gently. It won't collapse. We won't let it. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll be here to help rebuild if it does. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. When did you get so certain about everything? I'm not certain about anything. I just decided uncertainty isn't a good enough reason to stop trying. October arrived with the first hard frost, temperatures plummeting overnight and coating everything in white crystals that turned the valley into something from a fairy tale. Eliza woke early, anxiety tight in her chest, and went immediately to check the greenhouse. The plants were fine, more than fine. The heating system had worked perfectly, keeping the interior warm enough that the tomatoes hadn't even noticed the freeze. Eliza stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, watching her breath fog in the cold air outside while inside the greenhouse. Green things grew, and felt something close to triumph. Rowan found her there an hour later, still just standing and looking. "Everything all right?" he asked. "It worked. Your design worked." "You sound surprised." "I am. A little. Aren't you?" He considered the question seriously. Yes and no. I knew the theory was sound, but theory and practice are different things. Plenty of brilliant designs fail because reality doesn't care about math. But this one didn't fail. No, this one didn't fail. They stood together in the growing light, watching the sun paint the peaks in shades of orange and gold. And Eliza realized this was what happiness felt like, not the absence of fear or uncertainty, but the presence of something worth protecting despite them. The valley transformed as autumn deepened. The scattered trees turned brilliant yellow and red before dropping their leaves in a single week of wind that left the slopes bare. Animals that would winter over grew thick coats. Birds that couldn't survive the cold migrated south in formations that darkened the sky. And Rowan began teaching Eliza to see the valley the way he did, not as wilderness to be survived, but as a system to be understood. He showed her how to read animal tracks in the mud, identifying deer and elk and the occasional mountain lion. Taught her which plants were edible and which would make you sick. Explained the patterns of weather, how clouds forming on certain peaks meant snow within hours, how the wind shifting from west to east signaled a change in pressure that would last for days. "You're turning me into a mountain woman," she said one afternoon while they were gathering firewood. "Is that a bad thing?" "No, just different from what I imagined my life would be." "What did you imagine?" Eliza thought about it while she stacked split logs. "I don't know, something ordinary. A house in a city, a husband who worked regular hours. Children, maybe. The kind of life everyone expects you to want. Do you want that?" "I thought I did. When I was with Thomas, planning a future that never happened, that seemed like enough. But now..." She gestured at the valley, the mountains, the greenhouse visible in the distance. "Now that life seems small, like I would have spent 50 years being comfortable and died without ever really testing what I was capable of." "You don't know what you're capable of yet. Winter's coming. Real winter. Last year was mild compared to what some years bring." "Are you trying to scare me?" "I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference." But Eliza wasn't scared. She'd survived one winter up here, had learned the rhythms of cold and snow and isolation, and she wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't facing it with a stranger who kept her at arm's length. She was facing it with Rowan, who knew her completely now, her fears and strengths, her moods and needs, all the messy, complicated reality of her. November brought the first major snow, 3 feet in a single storm that buried everything and forced them inside for days. But the cabin was warm, the food supplies were good, and this time the isolation felt different. Not like imprisonment, but like retreat. A chance to rest after months of brutal physical labor. They read together by the fire, Rowan's arm around her shoulders while she turned pages. Cooked elaborate meals because they had time and nothing else to do. Made love in the afternoon with snow falling outside and the rest of the world feeling very far away. And they planned. Spread drawings across the table and argued about which structure to build next. Rowan explaining why certain designs wouldn't work, and Eliza pushing back when his objections seemed more like fear than reason. "The bridge," she said, tapping the drawing. "We should build this next." "That's years of work, maybe decades. You're talking about spanning a 100-foot gorge. So, we have time. Do we?" "We're not young, Eliza. I'm 43. You're, what, 24? 23. Almost 24. My point stands. I've got maybe 20 good working years left if I'm lucky. That's not enough time to build everything in these drawings. Then we build what we can, and maybe... She paused, the thought forming even as she spoke it. Maybe we teach someone else. Someday. Pass it on. Rowan went very still. You mean children? I mean whoever comes after us. Children, apprentices, people who want to learn. This valley, what you're creating here. It's too important to die with us. It's not important, it's just me trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. No, it's you creating order out of chaos, beauty out of grief. That matters. That's worth preserving. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You really believe that? Yes. Why? Because I've seen what the alternative looks like. I've lived in cities full of buildings that nobody cares about, designed by people who stopped seeing wonder in their work. And I've watched you create something with your own hands that makes people stop and stare because it's so clearly made with love. She leaned forward. Don't you see? This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about making something that reminds people what humans are capable of when we're at our best. Rowan was quiet for a long time, staring at the drawings spread between them. Then he reached for a clean sheet of paper and began sketching. If we're teaching someone, he said slowly, we'll need a proper workshop, bigger than what I drew before, with space for multiple people to work, storage for materials, maybe a small library for reference books. Eliza watched the design take shape under his hands, her heart swelling with something that felt almost painful in its intensity. This was what hope looked like. Not naive optimism, but the stubborn decision to build toward a future you might never see. December arrived with cold that made the previous winter seem mild by comparison. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes, breath turned to ice crystals in the air, and stepping outside without proper protection meant frostbite within seconds. They stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. But the greenhouse thrived. The tomatoes were fruiting now, small green orbs that would ripen slowly in the controlled environment. The lettuce grew in thick, healthy clusters. The herbs filled the air with scent whenever Eliza brushed against them. It's working, she said one morning, picking basil for their breakfast. It's really working. Rowan was checking the heating pipes, making small adjustments. So far, we won't know if it can handle deep winter until January or February. Why can't you just accept success when it happens? Because success makes you complacent. Complacent gets you killed up here. Or maybe being afraid of success is just another way of protecting yourself from disappointment. He looked up at her, sharp and assessing. You're getting good at seeing through me. I've had practice. Is it annoying, being married to someone who can't take a win without looking for the loss? Eliza set down the basil and moved to where he knelt by the pipes. It's not annoying. It's just who you are. The same part of you that won't accept a win without checking for problems is the part that designs heating systems this good. You don't get one without the other. That's very understanding of you. I have my moments. She kissed him lightly. But for the record, you're allowed to be proud of what we built. Just for a minute. Before you start looking for everything that could go wrong. Rowan pulled her down to sit beside him, both of them surrounded by growing things in the middle of a valley locked in winter. I am proud, he said quietly, of this, of us, of the fact that I'm still here, still trying, instead of buried under 6 feet of snow because I gave up. That's the most optimistic thing I've ever heard you say. Don't get used to it. But he was smiling when he said it, and Eliza thought maybe he was starting to understand that letting yourself feel joy didn't mean you were betraying the people you'd lost. It just meant you were still alive. Christmas came and went unmarked except for a slightly nicer dinner than usual, and Eliza giving Rowan a scarf she'd knitted from yarn she'd bartered for during their supply run in October. He gave her a wooden box he'd made in secret, perfectly jointed, with her initials carved into the lid. For keeping things that matter, he said, almost shy about it. Eliza opened it to find it already held something, a folded piece of paper. She pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, not of a building, but of her. Eliza working in the greenhouse, her profile caught in perfect detail, the sketch so lifelike she could almost feel the pencil marks breathing. When did you draw this? She asked, her voice unsteady. Couple weeks ago. You were so focused you didn't notice me watching. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. I just recorded what I saw. She looked at the drawing for a long moment, seeing herself the way Rowan saw her, strong and capable and fully present. Not the desperate girl who'd stepped off a train a year ago, but someone who'd been forged into something new by hardship and choice. Thank you, she said, carefully folding the drawing and placing it back in the box. For this? For everything. You don't have to thank me for loving you. Yes, I do. Because you didn't have to. You could have stayed locked in your grief, could have kept me at a distance, could have treated this as a transaction instead of a marriage. I tried. You wouldn't let me. Good. January brought storms that lasted for days, wind so strong it sounded like the mountains screaming. They were trapped inside for nearly 2 weeks straight, leaving only to haul water and check the greenhouse. The isolation pressed down harder than it had the previous winter, maybe because they knew what to expect now, knew exactly how long and dark the days would be. But they had each other. And they had the greenhouse, proof that growth was possible even in the deepest cold. One evening, while wind rattled the windows and snow fell so thick they couldn't see 10 feet beyond the cabin, Eliza asked the question that had been building in her mind for months. What happens when we finish? When the valley's full of buildings and we're too old to keep constructing? Rowan looked up from the chair he was carving, part of a set for the new workshop they'd build in spring. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe you should. Why? Because we're building something that could last centuries. Someone needs to inherit it. Someone needs to know what it means. We don't have anyone to leave it to. Eliza took a breath, her heart pounding. We could. The carving knife stilled in Rowan's hands. What? We could have children. Not now, maybe. But someday. When the valley's a little more established. When we have more than just the cabin and greenhouse. Eliza, I know you're scared. I know what happened to Mary makes the thought of having another child terrifying, but we can't let fear decide our whole lives. Rowan set down the knife with careful precision. It's not just fear, it's practicality. Having a child up here. No doctor, no help if something goes wrong, miles from any kind of medical care. It's too dangerous. Life is dangerous. Staying down in Broken Ridge is dangerous. Everything worth having involves risk. Not this risk. I can't. His voice broke. I can't bury another child. I won't survive it. Eliza moved to kneel in front of him, taking his hands. You're not the same person you were in Chicago. I'm not Ellen. A child born here wouldn't be Mary. Nothing would be the same as it was then. That doesn't mean it would end differently. No? But it doesn't mean it would end the same way either. She squeezed his hands. I'm not saying we do this tomorrow. I'm just saying don't close the door on it forever because you're afraid. Rowan pulled his hands free, standing and pacing to the window. Outside, snow fell in the darkness, relentless and indifferent. I need time, he said finally, to think about this, to imagine it without panicking. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. But the conversation hung between them for days afterward, an uncomfortable weight neither of them knew how to resolve. Rowan became more withdrawn, spending long hours in the workshop or checking the greenhouse obsessively, and Eliza gave him space, understanding that some things couldn't be pushed. February brought a thaw, temperatures climbing above freezing for the first time in months. The snow began to melt, revealing the valley beneath in patches of brown and green, and with the thaw came a visitor. Eliza saw him first, a figure on the ridge above the valley, too far away to identify but unmistakably human. Her heart jumped into her throat. Rowan, she called, trying to keep her voice calm. Someone's coming. He appeared at her side instantly, following her pointing finger. His whole body tensed. Could be a hunter. Could be someone lost. He watched the figure begin descending toward them. Could be trouble. Should we hide? Too late. They've already seen the cabin, probably the greenhouse too. He moved to the door, pulling down the rifle he kept mounted above it. Stay inside. Let me handle this. But Eliza followed him out anyway, staying close as they watched the figure approach. As it got closer, details resolved. A man, older, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who knew mountains. He raised his hands when he saw the rifle, showing he was unarmed. Rowan Creed? The man called. That you? Rowan didn't lower the rifle. Who's asking? Name's Samuel Moss. I'm the new judge in Broken Ridge. Horace Porter died last fall. I'm up here following up on some old records. What kind of records? Marriage certificate. Registered November 1885. You and a woman named Eliza Hart. The judge stopped a respectful distance away. I'm required to check on married couples in remote locations. Make sure both parties are accounted for and well. Rowan's grip on the rifle didn't relax. We're both here. Both well. You can head back down now. Mind if I speak with your wife alone, just for a moment? Yes, I mind. But Eliza stepped forward. It's all right, Rowan. I'll talk to him. The judge looked relieved. Just need to confirm you're here of your own free will, ma'am. That you're healthy and safe. It's standard procedure. Eliza glanced at Rowan, who looked like he wanted to argue but was forcing himself not to. She touched his arm briefly, then walked a short distance with the judge out of immediate earshot. Are you here by choice? Judge Moss asked quietly. Blink twice if you need help. Eliza almost laughed. I'm here by choice, very much by choice. You're healthy? He's not mistreating you. I'm healthy. She looked back at Rowan, standing tense and watchful by the cabin. He's the best man I know. The judge studied her face, seeming to find what he was looking for. All right then, I'll note in the records that both parties are well and the marriage appears sound. He paused. Though I have to say, ma'am, I've never seen anyone choose to stay up here year-round. Most folks think Creed's half crazy. He's not crazy. He's brilliant. Eliza kept her voice even. He's built something up here that most people couldn't imagine, let alone create. If you say so. The judge tipped his hat. I'll be heading back down now. You need anything brought up come spring? Supplies, letters, anything? No, we're self-sufficient. I can see that. He glanced at the greenhouse, visible in the distance. That's some impressive work. Never seen anything like it. After the judge left, Rowan was agitated for days. He checked the perimeter constantly, jumped at small noises, couldn't seem to settle. What if he tells people? He said on the third night, pacing the cabin. What if word gets out that there's something worth seeing up here? Then people know. So what? So they'll come looking. They'll want to see what we built. They'll intrude. Or they'll leave us alone because the climb's too hard and the valley's too remote. Eliza caught his hand as he paced past. You can't control whether people know about this place. You can only control what we do with it. I don't want it to become some curiosity, some destination for people looking for novelty. Then we don't let it. We keep building. We keep creating. And if anyone's crazy enough to climb up here, we decide then whether to share what we know or send them away. Rowan sat heavily, pulling her into his lap. When did you become the reasonable one? Right around the time you started panicking about hypothetical visitors. He huffed a laugh against her hair. Fair point. March brought the real thaw. Snow melting in earnest and the valley coming alive with running water and emerging plants. And with the thaw came Rowan's decision. He found Eliza in the greenhouse one morning, tending the tomato plants that had thrived all winter, and knelt beside her in the rich soil. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said, about children. Eliza's hand stilled on the plant she was pruning. And I'm still terrified, still convinced something will go wrong, still not sure I can survive losing someone I love again. He took her hand, dirt and all. But I'm also starting to think that being terrified of loss isn't a good enough reason to refuse life. What changed your mind? This. He gestured at the greenhouse, the plants growing in impossible conditions. We created something that shouldn't exist, kept things alive that should have died, not because it was easy or safe, but because we believed it was possible. He met her eyes. Maybe we can do that with other things too. Eliza's throat tightened. Are you saying yes? I'm saying I'm willing to try. Not right now. We should wait until we have more infrastructure, more safety measures. But someday, when we're ready, we might never feel ready, then when we're as ready as we're going to get. She kissed him there in the greenhouse, surrounded by green growing things, both of them tasting like dirt and possibility. Spring exploded across the valley in a riot of life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Trees budded and leafed. Animals emerged with offspring born during the winter, and Rowan and Eliza began work on the workshop. This time the construction went faster, their experience with the greenhouse teaching them efficiency. They knew how to work together now, didn't waste time with miscommunication or hesitation. The foundation went in within weeks. The walls rose steadily through April and May. By June, the workshop was complete, a solid stone building with high windows and space for multiple workbenches. Rowan moved his tools in with the reverence of someone setting up a temple, arranging everything with his characteristic precision. "Now you can make furniture for all the other buildings we haven't built yet," Eliza teased. "Now I can teach you properly. Not just how to help, but how to create." He was serious. Over the following months, he taught her woodworking the way he'd taught himself, with patience and repetition and high standards. She learned to read grain, to feel when a joint was right, to understand that good work was about attention to detail, not speed. And she discovered she had a talent for it. Not Rowan's level of genius, but something solid and real. She made her first chair that summer, crude but functional, and felt a pride unlike anything she'd known. "It's good," Rowan said, examining it critically. "Joints are tight, proportions are decent. You rush the finishing work, but the bones are solid. That's high praise coming from you." "It's the truth. You're learning." They built through that summer and into fall, adding to the valley's infrastructure piece by piece. A storage building for materials, a covered walkway between the cabin and workshop, a small dam to create a water reservoir that would feed the greenhouse heating system more efficiently. And all the while, the valley changed them, made them stronger, more capable, more certain of what they were building. The second winter was easier than the first, not because the weather was milder, if anything, it was worse, but because they knew what to expect, knew how to pace themselves, knew that spring would come eventually, even when it felt impossible. And in late February, Eliza woke one morning feeling different. Not sick exactly, but changed. She lay in bed, Rowan still sleeping beside her, and knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with intuition. She was pregnant. She didn't tell him right away. Waited until she was sure, until her body confirmed what her instinct already knew. Waited until the morning sickness started and her clothes began to feel tight, and there was no denying it. They were in the workshop when she finally said it, both of them working on chairs for a dining table Rowan was designing. "I'm pregnant." His hands froze on the wood he was planing. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there processing. "How long?" he asked finally. 3 months, maybe? I wasn't sure at first. He set down his tools with exaggerated care and turned to face her fully. How do you feel?" "Scared. Excited. Nauseous most mornings." She tried to smile. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Excited. Like I might throw up." They stared at each other across the workshop, two people standing at the edge of something that would change everything. "We'll need to prepare," Rowan said, his mind already working through logistics. "Build a proper bed for a child. Stock medical supplies. I'll need to learn everything I can about childbirth, about infant care. We should consider going down to Broken Ridge when you're close, staying there where there's a doctor." "Rowan," he stopped. "We'll figure it out. Like everything else, one step at a time." He crossed to her and pulled her close, his hand settling on her stomach where nothing showed yet, but everything was changing. "I'm going to protect you both," he said fiercely. "I swear, whatever it takes." "I know. But you also have to let yourself be happy about it." "I'm working on it." Spring came early that year, or maybe it just felt that way because they were so focused on preparing. Rowan built a cradle with the same obsessive attention to detail he brought to everything, making and remaking it until it was perfect. Eliza sewed tiny clothes from fabric they'd bought on a supply run, her hands shaking because the reality of what they were doing kept hitting her in waves. They were bringing a child into this isolated valley, a child who would grow up seeing maybe a dozen people in their entire childhood, who would learn from parents instead of schools, from mountains instead of cities. It should have felt irresponsible. Instead, it felt right. In early May, when Eliza was 7 months along and beginning to move with the careful deliberation of someone carrying extra weight, they made a decision. "We should write it down," she said. "Everything we've learned. How to survive up here. How to build. The location of water sources, the patterns of weather, all of it." "Why?" "Because if something happens to us, someone should know. Our child should have a record of what we created and why." Rowan resisted at first. Documenting their life felt like tempting fate. But eventually he agreed, and they spent evenings writing everything down in a journal Eliza had started keeping. Not just practical information, but the story of how they'd ended up here, what they'd built and why. The philosophy behind each structure, a record of a life that shouldn't have worked, but did. The baby came in late July, arriving 3 weeks early during a storm that trapped them in the cabin for 2 days. There was no doctor, no midwife, just Rowan and Eliza and a medical book he'd studied until he could recite passages from memory. The labor was long and brutal. Eliza had never experienced pain like this, pain that rewrote her understanding of what bodies could endure. And through it all, Rowan was there, steady and calm on the outside, even though she could see the terror in his eyes. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." And she did. At dawn on the 3rd day of the storm, when the rain was finally easing and the first light was breaking over the mountains, she delivered a daughter into Rowan's shaking hands. The baby's first cry was the most beautiful sound Eliza had ever heard. "She's perfect," Rowan breathed, tears streaming down his face as he cleaned their daughter and wrapped her in soft cloth. "She's absolutely perfect." He placed the baby in Eliza's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature they'd created and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. This was why people built things, why they struggled and suffered and kept going, not for themselves, but for this, for the chance to give someone else the foundation to build their own life. "What should we name her?" Eliza asked, exhausted and exhilarated. Rowan traced a finger down their daughter's cheek with infinite gentleness. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." The years that followed were the hardest and best of Eliza's life. Raising a child in isolation was exhausting, demanding, required constant vigilance. But Hope thrived. She grew strong on mountain air and her mother's milk, learned to walk on stone floors and wooden planks, spoke her first words to parents who hung on every sound. And the valley continued to grow. With a child to care for, construction slowed, but it didn't stop. They built a proper house over 3 summers, larger than the cabin, with separate rooms and better insulation. Built a school building for when Hope was old enough to need one. Stocked it with books they ordered through Judge Moss, who made annual visits and had stopped looking at them like they were crazy. By the time Hope was 5, the valley held 7 major structures and dozens of smaller ones. Gardens produced food year-round. The workshop turned out furniture of such quality that word had spread to Broken Ridge and beyond. Occasionally, someone would climb up asking to commission a piece, and Rowan would accept or decline based on whether he liked them. He was teaching Hope to work wood now, patient with her in ways Eliza had never seen him patient before. And Hope was learning, her small hands surprisingly steady, her focus impressive for someone so young. "She has your talent," Eliza said one evening, watching them work together. "She has your stubbornness," Rowan countered. "Wouldn't be learning this fast otherwise." Hope looked up at them with Rowan's pale green eyes and Eliza's determined expression. "I want to build a house," she announced. "My own house." "You're 5, Rowan said. "So? You said I could build anything if I learned how." "I did say that." He glanced at Eliza, something amused and proud in his expression. "All right, we'll start with a dollhouse. Teach you the principles on a small scale." Hope's squeal of delight filled the workshop, and Eliza thought about trajectories. About how a desperate choice on a train platform had led here, to a hidden valley where her daughter was learning to create instead of just consume, where beauty was measured by craftsmanship instead of cost, where isolation bred not loneliness, but self-sufficiency. They hadn't escaped the world's harshness. Winter was still brutal, work was still hard. There were days when Eliza was so exhausted she wanted to cry, days when Rowan withdrew into darkness and she had to remind him gently that he wasn't alone, days when Hope was difficult or sick or testing every boundary. But they'd built something that mattered, not just buildings, but a life that felt true. More people started coming as Hope grew older. Word had spread somehow, maybe through Judge Moss, maybe through the craftsmen who bought Rowan's furniture. Young couples looking for a different way to live, craftsmen wanting to study with someone who built like Rowan did. Even a few families with children seeking refuge from a world that was becoming increasingly industrial and impersonal. Rowan was suspicious at first, wanting to send them all away. But Eliza convinced him to at least meet them, to see if any were serious about the kind of life the valley demanded. Some left within days, unable to handle the isolation or the work. But others stayed, built their own homes with Rowan's guidance, started farms in the terraced gardens he'd designed, became part of something that was slowly transforming from one man's grief project into an actual community. By the time Hope was 10, 17 families lived in the valley. By the time she was 15, that number had grown to 30. They had a school with multiple teachers, a workshop where apprentices learned from Rowan and the master craftsmen who'd stayed, a hall where they gathered for meals and meetings and the occasional celebration. It wasn't a town. Rowan refused to let it become structured like towns were down below. It was something else, a community of people who'd chosen difficulty over ease, isolation over convenience, craftsmanship over mass production. And at the center of it all was the greenhouse, still producing food year-round, still glowing like a lantern on winter nights. Proof that growth was possible even in the hardest conditions. Eliza stood in that greenhouse one evening when she was 48 years old, 23 years after she'd first climbed into this valley, and marveled at the path her life had taken. She wasn't the desperate girl from the train platform anymore. Wasn't even the young woman who'd planted the first seeds with shaking hands. She was someone forged by choice and hardship and love into something she'd never imagined she could be. Rowan found her there, his hair more gray than dark now, his body still strong but moving with the care of someone who'd pushed it hard for decades. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "Trajectories. How a single choice can change everything." "Regrets?" "Not even one." She leaned into him. "You?" "I regret burning my drawings from Chicago. Would have been useful to have them as reference." He paused. "That's it. That's the only regret." They stood together in the warm greenhouse while snow fell outside, surrounded by growing things, and Eliza thought about the nature of sanctuary. How it wasn't about escaping the world, but about creating a small corner of it that reflected your values. How beauty could be carved from grief if you were willing to do the work. How love, real love, not the easy kind, was about choosing someone every day, even when the choosing was hard. Hope appeared in the doorway, 20 years old now, and engaged to a young architect who'd come to study with Rowan and never left. "Mom, Dad, are you coming to dinner? Everyone's waiting." Everyone. 30 families gathered in the hall Rowan had designed, eating food grown in gardens they all tended, living lives they'd chosen deliberately instead of settling for what circumstance demanded. "We're coming," Eliza said. They walked through the valley together, past structures that would stand for centuries, toward a hall full of people who'd learned the same lesson Eliza and Rowan had learned the hard way, that the best lives weren't the easiest ones. They were the ones you built yourself, with your own hands, according to your own vision. That night, after dinner and conversation and the comfortable chaos of community, Eliza and Rowan walked back to their house under stars so bright they cast shadows. The valley spread below them, lights glowing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. A kingdom they'd built, not through conquest or inheritance, but through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. "Do you think it'll last?" Eliza asked, "after we're gone? If Hope and her children want it to, if they keep building, keep creating, keep choosing this over easier options." Rowan squeezed her hand. "But that's not up to us anymore. We've done our part." "Have we?" "We've shown that it's possible. That two broken people can create something beautiful if they're willing to work for it. The rest," he gestured at the valley, the lights, the future they'd built but wouldn't see the end of. "The rest is up to them." They stood there together, looking at what they'd made, and Eliza understood that this was what legacy meant. Not buildings, though those would stand, not even community, though that would continue, but the proof that desperation could become purpose, that grief could become creation, that two people who'd lost everything could find each other in the wilderness and build a world. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and snow and wood smoke. Somewhere in the valley, a child laughed. Someone was singing. Life, continuing in the high country where everyone had said it was impossible. And Eliza thought about the girl she'd been, stepping off that train with $4.60, willing to marry a stranger because the alternative was unthinkable. She'd thought she was choosing survival. Instead, she'd chosen everything.